What if Deku was reincarnated to Konosuba? How would this change everything? Before we start, I want you guys to subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and also share this video with your friends. It will really mean a lot to me. You can also check other what ifs on the channel. The like aim for this video is 200. Your support keeps me motivated to bring more amazing what ifs for you guys. Now let's begin. A new chance. Izuku Midoriya had lived a short life full of disappointment and despair. First by being born quirkless in a world where 80% of the population had a quirker power. Second by being denied of support from his mother when she didn't give hope to his dreams. And the most painful of all, meeting his idol, and being shot down like the worthless person everyone deemed him to be. He had to admit that his mother didn't know at the time when he was diagnosed as quirkless what to say, especially when he was a crying mess. Her subsequent gain in weight was the result of the guilt she still carried from that day, and All Might had been honest about his situation, so maybe his suggestion was not wrong about becoming a cop, but it still hurt. What was I thinking? There's no way someone like me could ever be a hero. Izuku muttered to himself as he reached the entrance of an alley, where a crowd had formed, and a commotion was taking place. It was a villain attack. He had done it again, even when he said he would give up. He had walked toward a place where heroes would inevitably show up. He had done it so many times that it was second nature, always taking notes to help himself become a good hero. But with what All Might had said to him, he just couldn't understand why he walked here, until he saw the villain. Wait, that is the same villain and he has Koch-chan. Izuku nearly screamed as he saw the scene, beginning to drown on guilt as he realized that this situation was his fault. If only he hadn't clung to All Might when he leaped with the villain captured in the bottle. If only he hadn't chased after his dream so stubbornly. If only he hadn't been born. Time seemed to stop for Izuku as he caught a glimpse of Bakugo's face. How he seemed desperate, as if asking to be saved, eyes pleading for help. Before he could come up with a plan, or an excuse to leave, his heart had began to work overtime. His legs moved him forward, first with 2 shy steps, and then a full sprint. For Izuku, it wasn't a matter of being able to do something or not. It was all about saving someone in need, not for glory, but because it was the right thing to do. Leave him alone. Izuku shouted as he threw his backpack at the villain, managing to hit his eye with some of its contents. The villain wailed as the pain was too much to bear, loosening his grip on the explosive boy, and giving room for Izuku to try and grab his old friend and tormentor. What the heck do you think you are doing? Bakugo screamed in outrage at being assisted by none other than the one he called useless. I'm sorry, but you looked as if you were asking for help. Izuku meekly replied as he kept pulling at the blonde troublemaker, even as the villain regained control of himself, and began to wrap itself around Bakugo again. Detroit, smash. All Might's voice resounded with the power of 1,000 heroes, and was quickly followed by a blast of compressed air that dispersed the villain like it was nothing. Unfortunately, this attack had the effect of sending Izuku flying. The last thing he saw before blacking out was the image of fast approaching pipes in a trash can. Izuku blinked a few times, wondering how he had ended up in this dark room. He was still wearing his school uniform, although now he had his backpack, and no trace of the nauseating sludge was on his body. In fact, he felt as if he had been recently cleaned. He also noticed that he was sitting in what appeared to be a wooden chair, and the only visible object was a fancy chair in front of him, although it could also be called a modest throne. Where am I? What happened? Izuku asked to no one as he tried to look beyond the darkness of the room, but couldn't see anything else. The sudden sound of footsteps caught his attention, and a moment later another figure appeared in the room. Izuku Midoriya, welcome to the afterlife. The voice belonged to a girl with light blue hair, long to the waist, and adorned with what appeared to be a loop of hair on top, which matched her eyes perfectly. Her body was lean, but enriched with very feminine curves, and her blue blouse and mini-skirt, adorned with yellow trim, only enhanced how beautiful she was. Izuku would have preferred it if her skirt wasn't that high though. Unfortunately, you passed away just moments ago. The girl continued as she reached her chair, taking a seat and crossing her legs, right in front of a now flustered Izuku. While he hadn't seen anything, he still wished that the opportunity hadn't presented itself like that. Your life was a short one, but in fact, you are dead. The girl continued, with a voice that sounded as if she was mourning him, a solemn voice reserved for a temple. Izuku didn't need to ask for proof. His mind had been going over the last few seconds he remembered, and there was no way to have survived that. Now he only had to make sure of one thing. This one question, is Koch-chan safe? Izuku asked with fear in his voice, afraid to hear that his tormentor and former friend had shared his fate. Koch-chan? Ah, you mean Katsuki Bakugo. He is alive. The girl answered, lifting a great weight from the green-haired boy. Thank goodness. Izuku said while grasping his chest, showing tears and a relieved smile, making the girl before him roll her eyes. Not that he noticed. Although he would have been fine even if you hadn't intervened. The girl added as she seemed to take a peek at a book at her side, as if the information was written there. I know, Izuku replied absent-mindedly, earning a few blinks of surprise from the girl, who admittedly had expected some outrage from this boy. There were a lot of heroes around, and one of them would have eventually helped him, or, knowing Koch-chan, he would have found an opportunity to escape by himself. I know I wasn't needed, but I couldn't help myself, and his eyes looked as if he was asking for help. Izuku explained while looking at his fidgeting hands. The girl looked annoyed at his behavior, as if being denied the chance of having fun at his expense. I guess my only regret is that mom is going to cry a lot, but at least she won't have to keep worrying for me, Izuku continued, failing to see how the girl was now glaring at him. Shut up already. The girl shouted as she couldn't tolerate him anymore. Izuku reeled back at the sudden outburst, not understanding the reason why. Ahem. My name is Aqua, and I'm a goddess who guides humans who die young into the afterlife. The goddess Aqua returned to her solemn voice, as if her outburst never happened, gaining the young man's attention. You are presented with two choices, Izuku Midoriya. You can start from square one with a new life, or you can go to heaven and carry on like an old man. Aqua explained to the attentive Izuku, who quickly began to weigh his options. I see, going to heaven and rest surely sounds nice, and being reborn could give me the chance to become a hero again. Maybe this time I'll have a quirk and, as Izuku began to mutter, Aqua began to panic. She knew that a soul like this would immediately become an angel if he chose heaven, and being reborn wouldn't gain her anything. She quickly decided to take action to have things go her way. To tell you the truth, heaven is not the dreamy place you mortals believe it to be. Aqua quickly took a gossiping tone, breaking the muttering of the boy. Is it not? Izuku innocently asked, wondering what kind of place it would be. Maybe heaven needed heroes too. It is very boring, with no entertainment whatsoever, and you won't have a physical body, meaning that you'll never have sexual action. Aqua explained, trying to push the buttons of the boy. Had Izuku been a shut-in, she would have mentioned video games and manga, but she knew better than to try that. What? Why would I want to have? Izuku was flustered at the idea, but not enough to deter his suspicions. The idea of being the victim of a prank after his pitiful attempt at saving Bakugo began to enter his mind. I also have to warn you. There is no guarantee of you being reborn with a useful quirk. Most of the time, souls like you just get a minimal upgrade when reborn. In your case, it might be a lesser quirk, like changing the color of your hair, or breathing underwater at best. Aqua's words struck deep and hard at poor Izuku, leaving him with only poor choices, although the idea of not being quirkless was still worth considering. Now, there is a third option that not many have, but before telling you what it is, I need to ask. Do you still want to be a hero? Aqua asked now, and for the first time she saw a pure heart shining with blinding determination. Yes. Izuku answered without falter, showing fierce eyes that could not match the strength of his will. Aqua smirked just slightly, knowing that the bait had been taken, and maybe this time, she had the proper soul. There is another world, where quirks do not exist, and magic is as common as a sword, a place that had enjoyed relative peace for many generations. However, a devil king has appeared, endangering the lives of innocents and destroying the hard-earned peace. Those who were strong enough to oppose him have decided to not be reborn there after dying at his hands or the hands of his minions. Thus, the number of souls that could stand against him is in decline, leaving this world as easy prey for the devil king. Aqua explained, enthralling Izuku, who already seemed interested at the possibility of helping people. In order to save this world, the goddesses of both worlds have decided to invite worthy souls to be reincarnated into this world, allowing them to retain both their bodies and memories. Aqua continued her speech, although this time Izuku had concerns. But, what can I do? I'm quirkless. Izuku stated the obvious, thinking that choosing someone with a strong quirk would be the best idea. Then he remembered what she said earlier, about quirks getting better after being reborn, meaning that strong quirk users would rather remain as a new generation of heroes. True, and that is why I'll give you a boon of your choosing. It could be anything, from an artifact of tremendous power, to a talent of unlimited potential. Think about it. You'll finally be able to become the hero you always dreamed about, and the people of this world will get the hero they need. Doesn't this sound like the best deal? Aqua continued her sales pitch, not failing to notice the hope in the eyes of the potential hero. What about the language barrier? I know a little bit of English, but I don't think that would help me in this new world. Izuku was quick to ask, hoping to not have to choose a multi-language quirk as his boon, although the idea of having a quick learning quirk was enticing, especially with the idea of grasping magic. Don't worry, with our divine and kind aid, we'll fill your brain with all the knowledge you need to enter this new world. Aqua cheerfully answered while showing him a pamphlet that detailed the parts about the knowledge and the boon, but when he was about to read a warning label, the goddess took it away from him, covering said label with her hand in the process. I was reading that. Izuku gave a mild complaint, unable to raise his voice against a woman. Now you only need to choose your boon and you'll be ready to go. Choose now, and become the hero you always dreamed to be. Aqua cheerfully said as she threw up a bunch of sheets of paper, all of them containing detailed descriptions of an artifact or a special talent, akin to a powerful quirk. What are you doing? Izuku nearly screamed as he quickly began to gather the scattered papers. How was he expected to make such a crucial choice while facing such disorder? Aqua returned to her chair and sat with the idea that this wouldn't take long. She had done this enough times to know that those born quirkless had a tendency to select the first thing they saw as remotely powerful, be it an artifact or otherwise. As a result, she didn't pay any attention to the fact that the boy had gathered all the pages she had thrown, as that couldn't prolong his choice by much. Then she saw him carefully reading each page. 15 minutes later, a mace that only the owner can lift. It is made with the heart of a savage storm and enables, Izuku muttered as he read one of the descriptions, listing pros and cons at a cracking pace. Could you please choose quickly? All of that is pretty much the same. Aqua tried to speed up things, not liking being away from her fancy suite in heaven. I'm sorry, but I need to think this over carefully. It is a life-changing choice after all. Why is this named Crown of Intellect when it only reduces mana costs for magic? Izuku excused himself and continued his muttering. In response, Aqua decided to summon a large bowl of potato chips, because this seemed to be a long session in the making. 40 minutes later, turning your entire body into a steel-like material. Sounds like an amazing quirk. Izuku seemed excited about becoming a man of steel, to which Aqua sighed in relief, because she was about to finish all the chips, and the boy had kept muttering for far too long. There is no data about the magnetic properties of this material, or the fusion temperature or, Izuku's muttering returned full force, earning a groan from the goddess, who was at her limit. I have more people to attend to, you know. Aqua finally pushed an issue that the boy would have to heed. It was a lie, but she didn't want to spend more time in this place. I'm sorry, Aqua-sama. It wasn't my intention to stop you from doing your job. Izuku was quick to apologize, making that sorry face that was able to melt away any anger. Just choose already. Aqua weakly demanded, unable to stay angry against such a pure heart. Of course, I'll find a corner to study all of this while you tend to the others. No need to keep all your precious attention on me. Izuku proposed while starting to stand up, obviously about to wander off to find a place where he could read and mutter while not bothering her. This decision made Aqua snap. Just pick up one. Aqua finally screamed, unable to keep up with the nerd before her. I can't. There's too much to consider, and Izuku began to panic, not wanting to antagonize the goddess before him. However, he was unable to go against his instincts, for he felt that making a mistake was far too probable for his liking. Just ask for the most powerful thing in the bunch. Aqua continued to push the green-haired boy, cinnamon roll or not, he was too annoying for her. Wouldn't that be you? Izuku asked in worry, not wanting to say something so imprecise. Just do it. Aqua screamed once more, just wishing for the boy to disappear. I'll take the most powerful thing available. Izuku finally surrendered, unable to face the now angry goddess. As he said those words, the pages in his hands vanished, making the goddess give a sigh of relief. Now stay in the magic circle and don't move. Whatever you have chosen will either appear in your hands, or become a part of you. Aqua spoke again in her sullen voice, but the moment she made the circle appear at Izuku's feet, another circle appeared at hers. Eh? What is happening? Aqua asked in alarm, making the boy worry at her words. Is something wrong? Izuku asked, his voice full of concern. An angel suddenly descended from above. Her beautiful visage brought peace to the boy, but dread to the goddess, who looked like she was about to cry. Aqua-sama, we are all moved by your selfless sacrifice, and venturing to volunteer to accompany this pure heart, you have made way for redemption and compensation. The beautiful angel spoke, greatly confusing Izuku. I wasn't volunteering. He was supposed to get one of the trinkets. Aqua's words actually surprised Izuku, who didn't know what to believe anymore. Fear not, Aqua-sama, once you defeat the Devil King, you will return to us with a higher rank as a reward. As for this pure heart, any wish she has at the end of the journey will be granted without fault. The angel spoke again, gaining Izuku's attention. Does that mean I can return home with whatever skills and artifacts I gain? Izuku's hope consisted of returning to his mother and becoming a hero as he intended, a dream so pure that without noticing, he was the most luminous being in the room. If that is your desire, so be it. Now go, and bring peace and light to this troubled world. The angel confirmed, and the light began to grow in intensity. No. I don't want to go there. Aqua kept screaming and banging on the walls of the magic circle, obviously afraid of setting foot in the mortal world. Don't worry, Aqua-sama, with your power and a good plan, we can overcome anything, and I'll work really hard to return home, and bring you back. Izuku's words were pure and courageous, but to Aqua they were empty, for no one had managed to come even close to accomplishing the task. Within seconds, the boy and the goddess were enveloped in light, and then transported to the other world. A world where they'd have to learn what it meant to be a hero, the power of friendship, and the meaning of being human. As the light faded, the angel looked at the empty chairs, and gave a longing sigh. Please, O Radiant One, teach divinity to that failure of a goddess. The angel softly prayed, wanting the best for who had been her superior only a moment ago, and wishing for the day the boy gained his wings, as she, and many others were waiting for him in heaven. The first steps. When Izuku regained his ability to see, the first thing that filled his vision was the sight of a rural town. Carts with different items were being pulled by horses in the streets. People with rather simple clothing walked at the side of the road, and the houses didn't strike him as being made with modern techniques. Izuku took a deep breath to try to taste the pure air that such a place was supposed to be blessed with, but instead his nostrils caught the smell of horse excrement and dirt, with a little bit of grass mixed in. He guessed he would have to be outside the town to get the so-called pure air. This looks peaceful. I guess we need to. Izuku started to talk to the goddess that had come with him, expecting some guidance for this new world, and his task to bring peace to the people. Then he was violently taken by the shoulders, courtesy of a hysterical blue-haired girl. Why-ah-hi-hi. The call loudly cried in despair, shaking Izuku for all she was worth. Her face and voice were full of fear, and by now, Izuku could tell that people were staring at the scene they were making. Stop it. Izuku shouted as he lightly gave a karate chop to her head. The blow wasn't strong enough to actually hurt, but Aqua stopped and held her head in surprise, looking at the boy with big watering eyes. Now, keep calm and breathe. I know you didn't intend to leave your place in heaven, but it was by your wording that you had to accompany me. Now, we are in this together, and together we'll find a way to complete this task. I'll become a hero, and you'll return to heaven, okay? Izuku summarized their situation, giving a bright smile that the goddess found almost sickening, yet she couldn't fault him. Okay? Aqua finally replied with a downcast glance, knowing very well that she had sent countless people onto this path, and none had been able to get far from the starting point. Good. Now, tell me where to go first. There has to be a place where we can find clues on where to start, or somewhere to get recruited into the army or group intending to fight the Devil King, right? Izuku elaborated, asking the goddess for directions and guidance. Aqua was beyond annoyed by the bright eyes of this boy, but she wished to be able to tell him what he wanted. Why should I know that? Aqua answered, trying to not sound as upset as she truly was. Her despair was mirrored with anger, as she never expected setting foot on this backwater world. Aren't you a goddess? Gods are supposed to hold infinite knowledge, or at the very least, know how the world works. I mean, you made it look like you knew everything about this world, when you were telling me to jump in. Izuku explained his reasoning, and Aqua had to admit that she may have twisted the impression she was giving, not that she would ever say that out loud. I am a goddess. You can't expect me to know every little detail of every place in this world. This tiny city has nothing of interest at all. Aqua replied, earning a dumbfounded stare from the potential hero. What you are telling me is, that you sent people here without really knowing any details yourself? Izuku asked, wanting with all his heart that the goddess before him would answer in a way befitting her station, but he was met with disappointment when she gave a simple nod with honest eyes. I need to ask for directions, Izuku said while dropping his head in defeat. It didn't take long for him to find an elderly woman who looked tired while carrying a load of firewood. Putting a cute smile on his face, he approached her to offer his help, leaving a confused goddess to follow him out of fear of getting lost. A couple of hours later, see? We are now on the correct path. We'll surely find answers in the Adventurers Guild, Izuku said as he and Aqua entered the large building. The interior was quite well decorated with skulls and finely crafted woodworks. The tables off to one side confirmed the information about the establishment doubling as a tavern, and booths filled the remaining space, meaning that the busty lady behind the counter would surely hold answers to their many questions. Did you really have to help all those people? We could have been here ages ago if you had asked just a quarter of them. Aqua was quick to complain. Sure, he got the proper directions, a few pieces of bread, and even a couple of coins in return, but the goddess wasn't keen on doing that many chores for so little in return. The fact that she had done nothing but follow Izuku around, without helping, never registered to her though. Well, they needed help. Izuku's simple answer left the goddess seething, unable to cope with the gallant disposition from such a simpleton. Izuku had felt at home in this world. Everyone he had met was quirkless just like him. Everyone looked at him like he was just an average villager, and not a waste of space. It was so refreshing that he was left with an odd feeling of confidence. Now let's go to the counter. We need to be registered as adventurers if we want to gather a party to defeat the Devil King, Izuku added as he began to walk toward the beautiful lady at the counter. Aqua looked at the boy like he was completely different from the meek and useless kid she tricked into coming to this world. Hey, Izuku, remember to call me Aqua, and not refer to me as a goddess. I can't let my worshippers know I'm here walking among mortals. Also, why are you acting so dependable? Weren't you just a quirkless coward? Aqua finally said the things that were bothering her, not missing the chance to taunt the boy, really wanting him to show flaws on his behavior. I was a quirkless teenager in a world full of people with great powers. It's not so much about being a coward than being cautious. As for being dependable, my mother had some old video games still installed in the PC I used as a child. RPGs, I believe they were called. This whole situation reminded me of them, Izuku answered as they approached the desk, where a blonde woman with a beautiful figure greeted them. Hello, I don't believe I've seen you before. Are you here to register? The young woman addressed the young boy and his friend, already feeling pity for the plain-looking teenager with the pretty girl at his side, knowing that it wouldn't be long before a more handsome and experienced adventurer caught the eye of the blue-haired girl. We just arrived in town, so we'd like to get information on the guild and the jobs available. Izuku asked in a rather fluid way, surprising the goddess, who expected him to stutter incomprehensibly while turning red at the sight of the dangling breasts before him. Of course. At this hall we offer jobs to the registered adventurers, ranging from simple gathering tasks to monster exterminations. All of these are properly ranked in difficulty, danger and reward. Some of the jobs, or quests, have requisites, which can range from level and class, to party composition or gender. We don't take the last type of restriction, unless the client has come forward with every detail and explanation, so you don't have to worry too much. Registering is quite simple, as you only need to cover an entry fee, and this magical artifact will do the registration. The guild lady explained with a smile, glad to see the boy before her, keeping his eyes on her face for once, and wondering how long he'd hold out. "Aqua, did you bring any money?" Izuku asked to the blue-haired girl, making the guild lady wonder what kind of relationship they had. Izuku couldn't even feel surprise when she shook her head no. He even wondered if he was meant to be sent with any kind of wealth, but then he guessed that comparing this world to a video game was foolish to begin with. The fact that a guild existed was fortunate enough. "I see. Excuse me, Miss Luna, but can you direct me to a pawn shop or a place where I can sell some minor artifacts and trinkets?" Izuku asked after letting out a heavy sigh. He really didn't want to say it, but the goddess was proving to be less useful with each passing minute. On the other side of the counter, the beautiful lady looked thoroughly surprised. "I know such places, but how did you know my name?" The now identified Luna asked, as she was sure she had yet to tell her name to the newcomers. "It's on the plate," Izuku answered while pointing to the nameplate on the counter. "I know, but most people look, what kind of artifacts do you have? I may be able to point you in the right direction if I know you have something that will interest the owners." Luna changed the conversation as fast as she could, guessing that she was dealing with a scholar in training, or a failed one, as the clothes looked plain, but of high quality. He was also carrying a fancy backpack, definitely a sign of a sheltered education. "Well, for starters, I have this. It's called a calculator, and it is useful for fast mathematical problem solving. It will work as long as there is natural light, and will probably work for another year. It is brittle though, and water will ruin its internal workings," Izuku said as he took from his backpack a solar calculator. It was a simple model, but he guessed it would be considered magical in a medieval world. He didn't keep his hopes high though, guessing that at best he would get a few more coins, just enough to cover the fee. "Fast mathematics? For real? Do you know how it works?" Luna seemed very interested in the artifact, and Izuku was quick to explain its operation, thanking God for the numbers sharing the same universal symbols in this new world. Aqua watched from the sidelines how the busty lady seemed overly attentive to Izuku's explanation. Considering that her eyes let out how greedy she was at seeing the effectiveness of the skull trinket, it wasn't long before she and the boy began to set a price for the calculator, nor much longer for both parties to agree on the final transaction. The call was unsure about the events unfolding before her, for it was as if the boy had transformed from the shivering wimpy coward of his previous life into a functional human being. It was as if the fact that he was among quirkless people had given him the courage to face all the challenges that this world was throwing at him. "This is my final offer. The registration fee for the both of you, 1,000 Aris and 4 meal tickets," Luna said as she crossed her arms below her breasts, trying to use her natural charms to win this battle, grinning as she finally got the boy to blush. Make it 5 tickets." Izuku barely managed to look up again, regaining a fraction of his dignity in the process, making Luna pout a little bit. "Fine, it's a deal, but you need to write down the meanings of the runes." Luna relented, knowing very well that she actually got quite the bargain, for this wasn't the first time she saw this artifact, and remembering quite well how successful the man with it became. "Sure, just give me something to write on." Izuku accepted her terms, and was quickly given some parchment and a quill, leaving him to write the instructions, while Luna finalized the contract, as she didn't want this to become illegal trafficking of magical artifacts. Aqua was beginning to feel bored, wondering why this boy wasn't praising her already, or letting her shine a little bit. She was pretty sure that if she talked to some priest in the vicinity, she could probably get a small fortune by simply asking for a few coins. After all, she was an important goddess. "There we go. Now you only need to place your hand over the orb, and the artifact will do the rest," Luna instructed Izuku as the transaction finished. "Just like this?" Izuku asked as he did as instructed, and then watched in awe as the artifact did its work, writing on the card with laser-like lights at great speed. Once the light show finished, Luna took the card to read it aloud, gaining the attention of the boy, who didn't know what to expect. He wished to hear the occupation of hero, but he guessed that was a hard-earned title, and not a job class. "Izuku Midoriya, right? Let's see, average in most of your stats, above average luck which is unimportant to adventurers. This is odd, you have high intelligence and wisdom, a very rare combination." Luna trailed off while looking at the profile of the boy, wondering why it said nothing of his scholar upbringing, but she chalked it up to him being schooled outside of a proper academy. "Is something wrong?" Izuku asked after he noticed that the lady was spacing out, making her panic a little bit. "It's nothing, just looking at your class options. You can choose from these." cleric, wizard, rogue, druid and of course, adventurer, but that's the weakest class. Unfortunately, your physical attributes do not allow you access to the martial classes, at least not right now. Luna concluded, and then turned to look at the young boy, waiting for his decision. Izuku felt a little bit like when he was told that he was quirkless, unable to choose something that could place him closer to his idol. But then again, he guessed it was his fault for not taking it upon himself to train his body. Druid? What does? Izuku began to ask, wanting to hear descriptions and specifications of each class, starting with the first option that he knew nothing about. Unfortunately, Luna was distracted too. Druid it is, that is a rare class to choose. Luna said while selecting the class, oblivious to the fact that she had made a mistake. Wait. I just wanted to hear an explanation. Izuku shouted in distress, for he had wanted to analyze each and every class, weighing pros and cons against each other, not to be thrown into one by random chance. What? Oh no. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Luna apologized while repeatedly bowing, giving quite the show with her large breasts. Well, please don't do that. Izuku had turned red at the sight, and was actively trying to look anywhere but at her chest. 1 hour later, Izuku was sitting down alone at one of the empty tables in the guild. A commotion had started when Aqua had her card made because her attributes, with the exception of luck and intelligence, were maxed, giving her access to most of the advanced classes. She had promptly picked Archpriest. He guessed that a goddess would choose something to praise herself, and now, she was making a lot of noise, while selecting her skill set with her starting skill points. Izuku was told that should he choose to do so, he could always change classes instead of advancing into the natural upgrade of the Druid class. He had instead decided to study his card to see what he could do with what he had. Well, it couldn't be as bad as being quirkless. Izuku muttered as he began to browse his adventurer card, taking notice of his data, and how neatly everything was organized. The skill section allowed him to see that some skills were passive, and others required activation, which in most cases required mana to use them. A few ones had a timer, meaning that he could use them free of cost, but only a limited number of times per day. He also noticed that druids had a lot of skills to choose from, meaning that he could take a lot of them, or choose less than the full amount, and improve them by adding more skill points. I guess I should try something simple. Good berries sound safe enough. Izuku muttered as he looked at the description of the skill, a passive that had him grow berries on any plant he was touching, producing one every few minutes. The moment he selected the skill, he felt something changing within him. It was as if some dormant power had awakened, almost like a quirk. Izuku walked to an empty table where someone was eating grapes a minute ago, and took the now empty branch from the plate. Taking it to his own table, he stared at it quite intently. He didn't give any orders nor concentrated in any form, as the skill had said that it was a passive effect, so it had to come naturally. After a minute had passed, Izuku blinked in surprise because a cute round and red berry had appeared where a grape used to be. I think I can make this work, Izuku said with a smile as he plucked the berry and ate it, finding it really sweet and oddly filling. The description had said that it would be nourishing, but Izuku was more interested in its healing capabilities. It may never come close to a healing spell from a priest, or a commercial healing potion from the guild, but it was free, and quite constant. As Izuku began to read the rest of the skills, he began to toy with the idea of creating a skill set that would mirror a transformation-type quirk, something that would be easier to control, and easier to explain in case he managed to return home. The druid skill set included pretty much everything: buffs and debuffs, offensive skills, defensive skills, healing skills, and of course, the incredible capability of changing forms. Izuku tried to find a pattern that would set him in a quirk-like development, and upon watching more berries growing on the little branch, he decided to give it a try at being one with the plants. After all, he guessed that if that didn't help, he could change classes later on. Then, Barkskin, Vine Whip and Plant Manipulation, Passive Defensive, Active Offensive and Active Support. This may just work. Izuku muttered once more as he spent the last of his starting skill points. After all, he was a lowly level 1 unlike Aqua, who even had a couple of levels as a bonus. It was obvious that not everyone was created equal, but this time, Izuku wasn't going to let that truth stop him. Later that night, truth was a harsh mistress. That was what Izuku was just reminded of today. Adventurers were glorified part-time workers, with chores for the fresh starting ones like him, to poorly paid extermination requests for the rookie low-level adventurers. And while he knew that getting started wasn't going to be a glorious leap into fame and wealth, he had expected to be able to afford a room to sleep in tonight, and not the stables. This is going to be harder than I thought, Izuku muttered to himself as he shifted in the haystack he was using as a bed, noticing that his class actually gave him an increased tolerance to harsh conditions, meaning greater comfort in less than amicable conditions like the wilderness. Unfortunately for him, that attribute didn't extend to having horse excrement so close when trying to sleep. Much harder. Izuku finished his muttering as he turned away from the excrement just to see his companion, the so-called goddess that was now loudly snoring, hugging the object of his anger. A little after finishing with his adventurer's card, Izuku took his first job, gathering medicinal herbs at the edge of the woods just outside the city. It had been a fairly easy job to do, with no more danger than facing a few mosquitoes and the occasional landmine, but the reward had been a meager 500 heirs. Of course, Aqua had asked for the money to purchase something that was vital for the team, and Izuku was naive enough to believe her. Imagine his surprise when she appeared with a bottle of liquor and a sheepish smile. "At least I won't starve," Izuku muttered as he looked at the braided branch adorning his left wrist, already showing more berries which he was quick to eat. He was beginning to appreciate the survival potential of his class, and the potential savings he would make in terms of supplies. He still needed shelter though, so he decided to have that as a short-term goal. Defeating the Devil King would have to wait. Tomorrow I'll take an extermination quest, and this time, no more shared reward. Izuku muttered with a frown. He had been more than willing to share his money with the goddess, but after today, he was sure that she didn't really care about saving for the future. The night continued its course as Izuku began to make plans, knowing that being level 1 meant that he wasn't assaulting the Devil King's castle anytime soon. He needed to secure shelter and food, followed by a need to train hard in order to level up fast and efficiently, as well as recruit comrades in arms, and procure better equipment. Izuku barely remembered the video games that his mother had on the family's computer, but he still knew that in such a medieval setting, there had to be strong warriors, wise mages and cunning rogues. To assault the Devil King's castle, he required several frontline fighters, ranged units, and of course healing support, hence why he felt fortunate by having Aqua by his side as she was a supposedly powerful healer. She also had her godly gear with her, so there was no need to spend money or time in getting a better staff for her to help everyone, right? The next day, according to the guild's standards, Izuku and Aqua had the minimum required level to take this quest, the only quest available for their level. Exterminating giant toads. Giant toads were considered a local pest problem that was only relevant during mating season, because the giant amphibians would swallow cattle and defenseless people whole, in order to gather the strength to reproduce. That helped Izuku with the pity he would feel by slaying any animal that was just following its instincts without malice. The problem was that these giant toads were giant. Aqua, you are supposed to help me, Izuku shouted to the laughing goddess, who was one step shy of falling to the ground due to her uncontrollable laughter. The plan had been simple enough. Take one toad at a time, flank it from 2 sides, and then kill it with either the goddess's superior strength or Izuku's vines, whoever didn't have its attention anyway. The problem was that Aqua didn't stick to the plan. Ha 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 ha. You look so stupid rolling away from every little attack. And you can't even scratch that thing with your wimpy twigs. Ha 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 ha. Aqua continued chortling as she watched Izuku struggle against what the guild called a pest problem. Izuku had to find out the hard way that his vine whip skill didn't do the entire attack as the name suggested. It produced a vine that served as a whip, and he was expected to use it with his own skill. Thankfully, producing the whip seemed to grant him proficiency on its use, but the lack of experience was showing with his badly aimed hits, and the lack of visible damage on the slimy skin of the toad. Just help me already, Izuku shouted again, feeling angry at the disposition of this goddess, and feeling cheated for having his expectations of her potential being so thoroughly crushed. Fine, I'll help. But first, start adding Sama at the end of my name. This may not be Japan, but you know that you need to be respectful to me. Then you must swear that you'll join the Axis religious order and pray 3 times a day to me, and during lunch, if I say Gim, you must give me your food. Aqua began her list of demands while Izuku disengaged from the monster, not knowing that she had gained its attention. Izuku tried to regain the attention of the toad, or warn Aqua, but he was too late. By the time he was at an appropriate distance, the toad had chomped Aqua, and raised her up to begin swallowing her. Leave her alone, Izuku shouted as he leaped at the toad, generating a second whip on his offhand, and using plant manipulation stabbed them into the eyes of the creature. The toad did thrash around at the pain of losing its eyes, but it refused to let the girl go. Izuku continued to guide the vines deeper until they reached the brain of the toad, turning it into mush and killing the creature, freeing the now slime-covered Aqua in the process. Aqua, are you alright? Izuku asked as he reached her, retracting the vines by coiling them on his forearms. He had to admit that once combined, the druid's skills were quite useful, if weak as of now. Thank you, Izuku-sama. Thank you. Aqua began to say between sobs, trying her very best to hug Izuku like he was some kind of safety blanket. Izuku would admit that being hugged by such a pretty girl was like a dream come true, but the gross feeling of the slime that she was covered in, coupled with the penetrating smell it carried, made him wish she was a mile away. Calm down, Aqua. Remember your station, Izuku said in hopes of her stopping her show of gratefulness, succeeding in doing so when she separated from him, still sobbing at her deplorable state. That didn't go as planned, so why don't we return to the city to get you cleaned? We need to rework our strategy, and see if we can find another party member. I was able to take down this one, but there is no telling if I can succeed if more show up at the same time, Izuku stated, trying to reason with her, and secretly hoping to find someone more trustworthy than this mediocre goddess. No? Aqua suddenly said, shaking like a leaf, pulling her fists in a cute display of anger. What? Izuku was taken by surprise with the sudden shift. I cannot go back like this. If my beloved worshippers were to see me like this, they will lose their faith, so I can't retreat in defeat. Deku suddenly shouted, and then turned around to look for another toad, which she found quite easily in the distance. Izuku watched as the goddess ran toward her target with her fist at the ready, and as she began to describe her attack in lengthy detail, Izuku could tell that a massive amount of energy was gathering in her fist before she launched her attack. Blow. Deku shouted for all she was worth, hitting the frog right in the belly, doing nothing at all, much to Izuku's surprise, and her embarrassment. You know, now that I see you up close, I think toads are kind of cute, Deku said in a small voice, almost as if trying to appeal to the creature for mercy, just to be chomped upon like the last time. As Izuku ran to save the goddess yet again, he began to wonder where her worth was, and when he would get to see her divine help in action. He had to admit that he liked feeling like a quirk user, but he was still taking baby steps in what felt like the world's stage. He just hoped that some efficient and skilled party members could join soon, so he could focus on leveling and training to be a hero. Magical PTSD. Izuku stared at the self-proclaimed goddess, his eyes denoting how incredulous he was, how he didn't want to believe what she did, and how much he was doubting her capabilities. When they decided to post a request for party members, Deku demanded to be allowed to write it, calling on her superior knowledge about the world. However, this decision proved to be a truly bad idea. Really? Advanced job classes only? Izuku asked in obvious concern, for her requirements were beyond stupid. Hey. I have the most powerful advanced class, and I don't want to be surrounded by weaklings. Besides, don't we need strong party members to take on the Devil King? Deku tried to defend her reasoning, losing strength under the heavily inquisitive stare of the green-haired druid. First of all, there is no such thing as a most powerful class, otherwise I would take you directly to the Devil King so you can do all the work. Second, we are even level 5, what kind of powerful warrior would you want to join our party, if we can't even offer proper cooperation? Izuku began to counter the argument presented by the former goddess, not even bothering to be cordial to her out of desperation. I'm an archpriestess. Anyone would kill to have me in their party. Deku tried once more, just to falter at the deadpan look that Izuku was throwing at her. You posted the request early in the morning, and now it's almost noon. I don't see anyone approaching us to join our party, or to ask you to join someone else's. Izuku replied, and then ate one of his berries, as if to make it obvious that he couldn't take her seriously anymore. As Izuku and Deku were still discussing the contents of the request, someone began to approach their table. She was a girl short in height, dressed in a short vibrant red dress, that looked more like a tunic long enough to double as a skirt, black soft leather boots and a pointy hat with a white brim, a witch hat if you will, over her shoulders, a black cape with yellow trim flowed, giving her an air of mystery and importance. Only one red eye was visible on her face, as the other was covered by an eye patch with a cross symbol adorning it. I happened to notice your recruitment poster. The voice of a young girl caught the attention of the pair, making them turn to look at what seemed to be a magic caster. That we would meet is a fate chosen by the world itself. I have anxiously awaited the arrival of those such as yourselves. The girl with the eye patch said, starting like a serious adventurer, but losing all credibility when Izuku noticed her posing. He was sure that the eye pose belonged to an anime, but he couldn't remember which one. The girl suddenly did an overdramatic cape flip, changing her pose to look either imposing or sexy, but only earning a Q score in Izuku's eyes, as he had to admit that posing was somewhat important for heroes. My name is Megumin. My calling is that of an arch-wizard, one who controls explosion magic, the strongest of all offensive magic. Megumin presented herself as dramatically as possible, posing the entire time like a hero after a successful operation. Izuku would have loved the sight due to nostalgia, but the emphasis on the word explosion had him feeling shivers down his spine. There was a moment of silence as both Izuku and Deku were at a loss. The goddess was biting her lip to prevent her laughter from coming out, trying to at least have one recruit join today to show Izuku he was wrong, while Izuku himself was trying to suppress all the memories of being bullied by another explosive person. You also desire my forbidden strength, which is so almighty that I've been ostracized by the entire world. Megumin continued her speech, either oblivious to what the pair was thinking, or believing that she was dazzling them with her presentation. Izuku, however, had a bad feeling about this, especially at the ostracized part. Then show me thine resolve to peer into the ultimate abyss with me. When man stares into the abyss stares back. Megumin finished her speech, obviously satisfied and proud of herself. Izuku knew at that moment that he was dealing with a Chunobu, which gave him a little hope of not dealing with another Koch-chan. So, are you telling us you want to join our party? Izuku finally asked, confused at the length of the speech, and wondering why someone with an advanced job class would want to team up with them. Yes. I mean, you should be the ones begging me to join your party. Megumin finally broke character, sounding as childish as she looked, earning a cute smile from Izuku. That red eye, are you a crimson demon? Deku suddenly asked, pointing to the odd color of her eye which Izuku had chalked up to genetics. Indeed. I am Megumin, user of the finest magic crimson demons possess. Megumin returned to her character as she posed again, obviously proud of her heritage. My lethal magic has smashed boulders, demolished mountains. Megumin continued her obvious selling speech, but then Izuku noticed that her body had begun to wobble, and her legs now shaking. Megumin had begun to collapse before she could finish her speech, dropping down like she had lost all her strength. Izuku reacted fast, catching her lithe body before it could hit the ground, quickly cradling her like she was some sort of princess, much to Kwa's annoyance. Hey, what happened? Are you hurt? Izuku was quick to ask and worry. Stranger or not, she was someone in need of help, a concept that kept getting on Kwa's nerves. The girl, or rather her stomach, produced a really loud grumbling noise, shedding some light about her condition. I haven't eaten anything in 3 days. Megumin replied between heavy breaths. Izuku could tell that she wasn't lying, because she was way too light for someone her size. Do you have anything I could eat? Megumin's question was met with a heart-warming smile from the young druid, who was more than ready to use one of his meal tickets to help her. There was a small problem though. I'd gladly invite you to eat, but you've been starving for 3 days. If I were to give you something solid right now, you'll only get sick, so here, take some of these first. Izuku replied while showing his bracelet full of juicy good berries. Megumin was quick to hug his arm and chomp into the berries like her life depended on it, surprising the boy with the physical contact and earning some giggles from the goddess, who would most likely use this as teasing material later. A little bit later, it took about 10 minutes for Izuku to get the little girl off his arm, and by then she had gobbled up all of the available berries, including those that had grown in the meantime, looking better than she had mere minutes ago, but she wasn't full yet. Getting her to sit at their table wasn't hard though, as after being fed she was more cooperative, and willing to speak normally, well, as normal as it got in this world. So, about your eye, why don't you ask Aqua to heal it? She is very powerful at healing, so it shouldn't be a problem for her to restore it. Izuku asked as he dodged the little girl, who tried to reach for another sweet berry. Aqua really wanted to say she was very powerful at more things, but was afraid of the boy remembering the embarrassing toad hunt. My eye? Oh, right. Megumin seemed confused at first, but quickly stood up again, obviously getting into character once more. This is the magic item that suppresses my mighty magical powers. If I were to ever take it off, a great catastrophe would surely befall this world, Megumin explained in an overdramatic fashion. While Izuku knew he was dealing with a Chunibyo, he also knew that magic was a reality on this world, meaning that the girl could be saying the truth. So, your powers need to be sealed. I don't know if we can deal with something that dangerous, Izuku muttered, thinking on finding a way to make a better seal or restraint to help the little girl. Megumin took the muttering as a sign of rejection, so she decided to act quickly, for the berries. Well, that was a lie, I just wear it for the looks. Megumin confessed in a rather apologetic voice, earning a face palm from the boy, but not shouting a rejection. You know, crimson demons are born with high intelligence, and possess great magical powers. Generally they make great magicians. And all have weird names. Aqua supplied, talking about the last bit as if making fun of a racial trait, earning a glare from the short girl. Weird? I don't think her name is weird. Izuku was quick to stop the fun for the goddess, knowing that it was improper to call a name weird, just because it didn't sound like a local one. Megumin was quick to throw a smile his way, feeling relief at finding someone who wasn't making fun of her name. Yeah. Just think how it feels for me. I mean, from my perspective, everyone here has weird names. Megumin added, making sure to make it sound like a general observation, and not like an insult for her soon-to-be party members. So, what are your parents' names? Aqua asked as a clear retaliation, knowing that at least one of them would change Izuku's mind. My mother is Yui, and my father is Hyoizaburo. Megumin answered, seemingly proud of her parents' names, but earning a snort from the archpriestess. Aqua, don't be mean to foreign cultures, it's not like your name is any better, calling yourself water. Izuku, fed up by how rude the goddess was, decided to support the newcomer, something that obviously angered the goddess. Anyway, my name is Izuku, and I'll be happy if you join our party. We have a pending quest to complete, and that will serve to dispel any doubts we have about each other. Izuku finally welcomed the little girl into their team, making her smile in true happiness, until her stomach growled again, regardless of the rather large amount of good berries she had eaten already. After lunch, of course, Izuku added, making Megumin shed tears of gratefulness. 2 hours later, Izuku and the 2 girls were now standing at a small hill outside of town, bordering the nearby forest. The plan was simple. Search for an isolated giant toad, and then testing cohesion or Megumin's magic. According to the threat level, Megumin had no trouble seeing this druid as a scholar, for he was first a thinker, and then a fighter. There's one upon that hill. Aqua was quick to point out, eager to get revenge on the amphibians, and wishing to get some quick cash. She was still sore at Izuku, for no longer sharing the reward money of the quests. It hasn't seen us yet, hold your positions. Megumin, what do you think? Izuku asked in a moderately low voice, wanting to minimize the risk of being spotted by their target. The distance is perfect, I can safely make it explode. I will need you two to remain vigilant though, as explosion magic is extremely powerful. However, such power requires time to gather and cast. Megumin answered, explaining the steps to ensure proper casting. Understood. Aqua and I will keep you safe until you are ready. Izuku answered without hesitation, something that Megumin really appreciated. Izuku was quick to appreciate the speed of his job class, as passive abilities were always active, and most of his activated skills required almost no casting time. Being a sitting duck would make him really nervous. Izuku, there's another one over there. Aqua screamed at her companion, making Izuku and Megumin wince at her loud voice. Thankfully, the first frog had yet to notice them, but the new arrival was already heading their way. Two at the same time. Megumin, do you think you can still fire at the unmoving one? Izuku quickly asked, knowing that he could take on one as long as the other was not focusing on him. It is a safe distance, so yes, just finish that one off quickly, so you don't miss my glorious power. Megumin declared with confidence, already gathering the required mana to cast her beloved spell. Right? Aqua, this time we have to, Aqua. Izuku couldn't help but shout after seeing the goddess charging against the giant toad. Izuku gave a last glance at the still unaware toad before running after Aqua, knowing very well how this was going to play out, knowing that he had to be quick to save the goddess, if he wanted to return to protect the Crimson Demon, that was now his comrade. Aqua was using her staff to call upon her divine magic, pouring her heart into getting revenge for the humiliation of the previous day. Her staff then glowed with power, and she aimed dead center of the toad's belly. God, Requiem. Aqua shouted the name of her attack as she delivered it, just to be chomped upon by the toad. Izuku had to repeat the same move he used the day prior, using his vines to destroy the eyes and seek the brain of the monster. He did it faster this time, easier than before, and he didn't know if that was a good thing. Are you alright? Izuku asked as he helped Aqua stand up. It was then that they felt the change in the wind, and the obscene amount of power gathering in a single place. Taking a glance at Megumin, Izuku decided to run to her position, not knowing how long the toad would remain oblivious to this change. Darkness blacker than black and darker than dark, I beseech thee, combine with my deep crimson. Megumin began to intone as Izuku managed to see the large amount of mana converging around her, spiraling and forming a small tornado. The time of awakening cometh. Justice, fallen upon the infallible boundary, appear now as an intangible distortion. Megumin continued her chant as the wind shifted, centering the swirling mana on the giant toad in the distance that by now looked intimidated and unwilling to move. Dance, dance, dance. Megumin's voice began to pick up even more intensity, just as the torrent of mana surrounding the now fear-frozen toad. Izuku had almost reached her by now, and still, he couldn't help his mind telling him to run in the opposite direction. I desire for my torrent of power a destructive force. A destructive force without equal. Megumin reached a crescendo as the torrent of mana turned chaotic, making Izuku stop in his tracks at the sight of the obvious danger. I turn all creation to cinders, and come from the abyss. Megumin's words seemed to trigger the mana to start reacting, for Izuku could see flashes here and there, something that looked truly unstable. This is the mightiest means of attack known to man, the ultimate attack magic. Explosion. Megumin shouted as she fired a triggering explosion from her staff. Izuku watched how the relatively small explosion made flashes of light appear everywhere within the mana vortex, gaining intensity and speed with each second, and then, they all collided at the same time around the toad. The resulting chain reaction created a continuous explosion that created shockwaves strong enough to make Izuku's bones vibrate. The heat was intense to the point of making him feel as if about to be burned, and the light emanated was blindingly strong. Izuku felt as if Koch-chan was bullying him again with full force, but there was no Koch-chan, and the explosion happened too far away. Is this what magic can do? Izuku asked no one as he took a look at the crater left behind by the explosion. There was nothing left, no trace of the toad, not even a trace of the ground where the toad once stood, only a smoking crater with carbonized stones. Izuku was horrified at the sight. It was too much power for such a simple task, too much destruction for such a small target. It was a horrifying reminder of what Koch-chan could become, of what he could become if Koch-chan managed to get too strong. Izuku almost wanted to tell the girl to leave him alone, to stop walking such a destructive path. Then he heard the ground moving, and Aqua's scream. Izuku. Izuku. Another one. Aqua screamed as she backed away from the incoming toad. Apparently the explosion had awakened it, too close to the explosive girl. Megumin. Retreat at once. Izuku ordered as he knew that spellcasters were physically weak, unfit to take punishment. There was a problem though as Megumin was prone on the ground, unmoving. I'm sorry but I can't. My art, powerful as it is, requires far more mana than I. Megumin began to explain her weakness, trying her best to sound as cool as possible, while trying to find the correct phrase to ask for help, which she didn't need to. You'll explain later. Izuku shouted as he enveloped her with his vines, taking her away from the toad that was pretty much ready to swallow her whole. Megumin had to admit that the druid was pretty warm to the touch, as he had tied her against his back. Izuku. That thing is now following me. Help. Aqua was quick to scream, gaining his attention. You're not eating anyone. Ever again. Izuku shouted as he realized that this particular toad was too stubborn about eating human flesh, most likely the result of liking such meat after a successful hunt. Izuku ran after the toad, not managing to reach a good speed due to his normal conditioning, and having to carry the small girl on his back. He opted for creating even more vines, moving them to intercept the monster, succeeding in grasping one of its legs. He willed more vines into existence, but this time he sprouted them from the already created vine, and ensnared both legs, making it trip. I would have let you go if you simply had left, instead you tried to eat my friends. Izuku was beyond angry, as it had been bad enough to see the goddess almost eaten once. Even if she was annoying, being devoured was something she didn't deserve. More and more vines began to cover the struggling toad before piercing into its body through any holes they could find. The toad redoubled its struggles, but within a minute, it was dead, with most of its organs skewered or turned to mush. Izuku didn't like this level of violence, much less how easier it was turning out to be. Then again, it was a little bit like hunting game, as the meat of this large animal would be used by the guild to make the local specialty. Fried toad, extra crispy. Well, that makes 5, Aqua said at the sight, sounding like a bittersweet victory celebration. Quest completed. Megumin asked, getting really comfortable on her warm nest. Quest completed. Izuku replied, feeling tired, mentally tired. This had gone wrong on so many levels, forcing him to work twice as hard and 3 times harder than needed, but at least he was learning about this world, its inhabitants, and more importantly, about himself. Hey, Izuku, if we share the reward we could. Aqua began to speak in her cute voice, trying her best to convey cooperation and goodwill, all while following Izuku who was walking to the city. You can do whatever you want with your hard-earned money. I'm saving mine to get some sort of shelter. Izuku vehemently said while interrupting the goddess, who looked not pleased at all. What's wrong with spending a few more nights in the stables? Aqua was quick to ask, seeing her chance at getting more expensive wine going up in a smoke. So, what happened there, Megumin? Why did you collapse? Izuku asked to the girl he was giving a piggyback ride, obviously ignoring the now whining former goddess. Ah, yes. Explosion magic is the strongest magic there is. As such, it requires the largest amount of mana. When I cast it, I use everything I have. In short, I exceed my limits to cast it, which leaves me indisposed. Megumin replied, sounding a little shy at the end. Sounds like a bad deal to me. I don't like it. Don't use it unless it is an emergency or a well-planned tactical strike. Izuku ordered with a voice firmer than he intended, earning a nod from the Crimson Demon Girl. Stick to something else while I work on strategies where explosion is required. Izuku added now, feeling the need to be specific to earn useful results. In the background, Aqua insisted on Izuku sharing his money with her, not able to understand that her trick wouldn't work again. I can't. Megumin deadpanned, making Izuku stop, and turn to look her in the eye. She had to admit that for what she had said, those green eyes didn't seem all that angry. Why? Izuku asked, more in concern than anything else. If magic was real in this world, so must be curses. Because, I only like explosion magic. Megumin replied with her best straight face, trying her best to prepare for the usual rant she received in these situations. That's the only reason. Izuku asked now, sounding disappointed but not angry. Well, she loved explosions just as much as Koch-chan. At the very least she didn't have his horrible disposition. That's the only reason. Megumin replied, getting ready to cling to the druid and beg for a place in his party. Those berries were divine, and she could get used to his warmth too. You could have said you were cursed, or that your family bloodline restricted you, Izuku said as he resumed his walk, not loosening his grip on the explosive magician. That's so cool. I can't believe I didn't think of that before. Let me change my explanation. Megumin was excited since not only had the druid not dropped her on the spot, he even managed to not be angry at her. You can't change it now. I already know the truth, and we have to work on what you can do. Izuku added, knowing better than to be unreasonable. After all, everyone he knew with a quirk refused to use anything else. Still following them, Aqua was seething, unable to deal with how this boy was acting so high and mighty, and how he was giving more attention to the newcomer. If he didn't redirect his attention to her soon enough, she would have to resort to calling him a lolicon. Chains of morality. Izuku sighed, trying his best to see the better side of his companions, earning sympathetic smiles from the counter lady, and the pity of the waitresses. No one wanted to see the cute druid so down at this time in the morning, but the guild was a business too, so there were no free drinks for the boy. Just an hour ago, the 2 girls of his party began a heated argument, and being the good-natured guy he was, he tried to calm them down. Flashback. It all started harmless enough. Izuku had brought up a topic Megumin was not comfortable with, becoming useful. I'm not saying you have to learn and use other attack spells, Izuku said with a warm smile, trying to convey only good intentions. I'm just saying that a little bit of utility would benefit us all. Megumin pouted as she tried to come up with an answer to earn victory, making an adorable sound as she tried to look menacing. And I'm telling you that I only love and use explosion magic. Megumin replied after a few seconds, as if trying to dominate Izuku through her childish display. Anything else is just a waste of time and skill points. Izuku couldn't help but smile at the little girl, unable to get angry at her stubbornness, but truly willing to help her get over her obsession, so she could grow into a better archwizard. The ways? Really? Izuku asked with a tilted head, already knowing where to strike. How many points does it cost to learn Mage Light or produce Flame? Izuku already knew the answer, so Megumin's pout was a clear sign of her defeat, at least on the logic department. 1 point each, Megumin replied in a low voice, not failing to notice the victorious smile on the young druid's face, but still. So, you lose nothing, but gain a lot. Izuku interrupted, making Megumin look down for a moment. Did you know that you can set things ablaze with produce flame? You could still make things explode with it. Megumin really didn't want to give in, but at the same time, Izuku's logic was flawless. She could still be the best at making explosions, while being able to be useful in many more situations. Then Aqua spoke. Stop it already, this little child will never listen to you. Aqua's words were not only mocking, but they also hit the archwizard where it hurt the most. Besides, showering her with attention only makes you look like a lolicon. I'm not a child. I'm not a lolicon. Both Megumin and Izuku slammed their hands on the table in clear disagreement, making Aqua flinch at the energetic response. Then the two locked eyes with each other, as if suddenly realizing something. I'm 14, and you? Izuku asked to the petite archwizard in a slightly low voice, earning the surprise of his female companions. 13, I'm not a child anymore. Megumin replied, trying her best to be discreet about scanning the boy before her. See? Same age range. Izuku added as he returned to his sitting position. Yeah. I'm not a loli, so he is not a lolicon. Megumin added as she sat too, crossing her arms for added impact. Besides, I wouldn't hit on someone I see like a little sister. Izuku finished, unknowingly digging his own grave. End of flashback equals. Izuku remembered with no little guilt how Megumin excused herself to hit the local bookstore, to think about his proposal in peace. Izuku had to admit that he should at least have explained to the archwizard that it was too soon for him to talk about romance, not that he was able to see her like a woman, yet. Aqua was so infuriating after Megumin had left with a haunted face, laughing at his lack of tact, and toying with the girl's heart. To make things worse, the moment it became obvious that he was about to reprimand her, she fled, excusing herself to go to the local Church of Axis, to grace her followers with her divine presence. Girls are so complicated, Izuku muttered to himself, knowing that it was not his fault that the young girl had jumped to the wrong conclusion, and yet feeling somehow guilty about the whole thing. In an attempt to distract his mind from his problems with girls, Izuku turned to his adventure card, taking notice of the level ups he had gotten, and the skill points he now had at his disposal. Deciding to not give in to the temptation of just strengthening his current skills, he decided to check out the other skills he could potentially use, either as his own way to build up his quirk-based skill set, or a method to better himself for the monumental task of defeating the Devil King. Plant growth, spec growth and dancing lights, Izuku muttered to himself as he read the descriptions of said skills. Plant growth allowed him to either ensure bountiful growth on the local plant life, be it crops or otherwise, or to make plants he could touch grow according to his needs. Spec growth made plants he could see grow sharp thorns of varying sizes, apparently to be set as traps or to hinder the movement of diverse creatures. Dancing lights produced numerous wisps of light that would take any shape he imagined, and would move according to his will, either dispersed or as a single source of light. Izuku had a little bit of experience combining skills to create unintended effects, like his vine whip, which could be controlled with plant manipulation to make it act like a tentacle. As much as he hated the comparison, by this previous experience, he wondered if it was possible to combine more skills to create something new for maximum versatility. Well, only one way to know for sure, Izuku muttered once more as he selected and purchased the 3 skills. The moment he felt his changes taking place, he decided to conduct an experiment. First he created the vine whip, and used plant manipulation to coil it around his arm and hand to form a green knuckle duster. Then he activated spike growth. This may work, Izuku muttered as he watched his knuckle duster sprout sharp-looking thorns, but only on the outside, keeping his hand safe. This will definitively work. Izuku almost shouted as he watched the effects of plant growth, making the already sharp thorns take the shape of menacing claws. Happy with the results, he spent his remaining points on bark skin and spike growth, making them better, so he wouldn't have to doubt his combat capabilities. If the girls were to be endangered by more giant toads, he still doubted the effectiveness of his skills on armored opponents, but he was still a low-level druid. Boys. A blonde male adventurer entered the guild hall with quite the loud scream, earning everyone's attention. Lady Dranya is in town. Murmuring quickly rose among the male adventurers in the hall, making Izuku mildly interested, just not enough to ask questions about it. Even if he had been here for only a short while, he had begun to understand the inclinations and proclivities of the local population. He guessed that the bikini armors that many females like to wear influenced such unsightly behavior on the more crude guys. You sure about that, Dus? One of the other adventurers, one with a mohawk, asked the now identified blonde. It's rather early for her to come here. Now Izuku was truly interested, as someone famous was in town, and apparently her appearance was something of a yearly event. He had to wonder though, was she a special merchant? A performer? As soon as Dust made his way to a table, the doors of the guild hall opened, revealing a voluptuous woman with long black hair. Izuku was seriously thankful for her rather sensible dress, as it covered her entire body. While not hiding how beautiful she was, her eyes were a little eerie though. Izuku gasped when another two figures entered behind her. One was a petite short girl, probably the same height as Megumin, with midnight black hair that seemed frozen in a specific style, just long enough to cover her ears and one eye, giving her a little of an emo cut. Her arms, however, were a pair of large wings with long feathers the same color of her hair. To top it all off, her legs, from the knee down, were avian in nature, large leathery talons ending in hooked claws. The term of harpy came to mind by looking at her. The second one, while also female, was more like an Amazonian champion. Her arms and feet were reptilian in nature, and covered in thick scales. From the end of her back, a massive reptilian tail grew up. Parts of her face were lined with scales, and instead of human-looking ears, large fin-like structures were visible. The scales and long hair were all white, which coupled with her pale skin and red eyes, gave her quite the albino appearance. Izuku really didn't want to say lizardman for some reason, maybe due to her glaringly female body, or maybe because she sported quite the intimidating muscles. What made Izuku concerned about these two, however, were two facts. First, they were wearing only cloth sacks as clothes, and second, they had massive iron collars around their necks. There was no other way about it. He was looking at slaves. Madame Dranya? Luna asked in mild surprise, making Izuku pay attention. We weren't expecting you until next summer. I know, dear, I know my presence stresses you and all the other females in town. The woman spoke in a rather apologetic way, if only mirrored by how mocking her voice was, but I assure you that I've come for a different kind of business. At her words, most of the males at the hall voiced their disappointment. Izuku had a bad feeling about this, as he couldn't imagine why the males were so keen to see this woman, who walked around with female slaves, in a town with no shortage of perverts. Oh god, are you certain? Dranya asked after a few minutes of conversation, forcing Izuku to return to the present, this exact quest. Indeed, the nobleman you were looking for took this very same quest. Luna answered with a worried look in her eyes. Only one of his party members returned, speaking about how he was murdered by the goblin champion. And this party member didn't carry his belongings. Dranya's question made Izuku frown. She returned barely alive and with most of her clothes torn. Luna informed, as if taking offense, it is pretty obvious she didn't have time to recover the belongings of her companions. I see, Dranya replied with a rather evil smile, sending shivers down Izuku's spine. The woman looked at the quest board for a few seconds before turning to the tables of the hall. Izuku could see the cold calculating eyes of the woman, looking at everyone within the hall like tools in a shed, as only disposable objects. Slaying the goblin champion and clearing the infested cave within the forest, 1 million Eris as a reward. Dranya loudly announced the quest and reward, not failing to notice that the adventurers gathered didn't seem all too interested. As long as I can recover the belongings of my fellow imperial nobleman and his party, you can keep the entire reward, plus whatever else you can find within the cave. Dranya's eye began to twitch as her only answers were the occasional cough here and there, as it was obvious that her request was being ignored. Izuku knew why she was being ignored though. The quest was a truly dangerous one, as well as poorly paid for the hazards. Goblins, while being nothing more than an annoying pest in the open forest, were absolutely deadly within their nests, where they could move and ambush with absolute impunity. Being led by a champion only made it worse, meaning that if the woman wanted to hire help, she would have to wait for some high-level heavy hitters to arrive. I will also be willing to part with any of my commodities, Dranya said with annoyance, obviously using a last resort, this time earning some hopeful stares, within reason, of course. As she finished, most of the hopeful stares died down, until a pair of hands slammed into a table, and a green-haired boy stood up with a rather penetrating stare. Will you be willing to part with your slaves? Izuku asked aloud, earning a surprised stare from the vile woman, and yet he felt his stomach drop at the lack of murmurs or cries of outrage, at the mention of such a horrible word. These two? Dranya asked as she turned to look at the now fearful harpy and the frowning reptilian woman. Sure. Hours later, on their way toward the center of the forest, as they traveled on a wagon toward their destination, Izuku couldn't help but feel that everything was wrong. He had expected that the adventurers at the guild, especially the women, would be outraged at the mention of slavery, at seeing the girls in such a horrible state, but no one paid any mind to such a sight, a crime against humanity. Every now and then he would turn to look at the two girls in the back of the wagon, just to find that both of them would return the gesture with curiosity. They seemed to understand that he was interested in them, but even that seemed wrong in the mind of the young druid. I'm going to take an educated guess, Dranya said, finally breaking the uncomfortable silence, and say you are not from around here. Izuku let out a sigh, knowing that the vile woman was about to mock his lack of knowledge, and probably say that slavery was perfectly legal. Izuku began to answer while thinking on how to word it as something plausible, from a faraway land. The vile woman let out a chuckle, as if making fun of his answer, earning a frown from the teen. I suppose that in this faraway land slavery is illegal. Dronya's reply surprised Izuku, as that meant she at the very least was aware of the idea that slavery is wrong. Yes, it is. Izuku answered with some caution. The woman smiled whitely, looking absolutely evil while doing so. I'm going to take another educated guess. Dronya's tone had taken on a very somber tone, making Izuku sweat. Your faraway land is called Japan. Izuku was taken aback, torn between feeling excited by finding another traveler like him, and fearful of what that could mean. It is. Izuku couldn't help but to answer with wide eyes. Are you two from Japan? Do I look Asian to you? Dronya could only chuckle at the hopeful question, shaking her head no, I am from England. Admittedly, Izuku felt like an idiot. Of course she didn't look Japanese. He was just hoping that she was on the same page as he was. Another thought crossed his mind. What if she was from an alternate Earth? You must be fairly new to this world to still stick to your hero dreams. Dronya's continuation at least answered one of Izuku's doubts, as her wording meant a world of heroes. I was like that when I first arrived, wanting to make up for being born crookless, by becoming the most incredible heroine of this world. Izuku couldn't help but to reel at such a revelation, and at the fact that the woman at his side had given up. What changed? Izuku asked with apprehension, not wanting to hear the typical bullshit about it being a hopeless dream, and yet not willing to be swayed from his own dream by some harsh reality speech. I found out that this world doesn't deserve a real hero. Dronya's answer was actually delivered with a sad voice, so I gave up. Seeing the frown on her companion, she decided to elaborate. I started my journey in the Empire, the neighboring nation. I was 14 and naive, full of hope in a really sparkly city where heroes of legend were born, and with an invincible treasure in my hands, I truly believed that I would bring the Devil King to his knees, and administer justice to save the lovely world that welcomed me with open arms. Dronya's words were full of sarcasm and pain, making the poor druid feel bad for her. 1 week later, just one hecking week later, Dronya's words came with a face full of anger, and a hiss that was more akin to an enraged snake. Do you know how horrible it feels to give your heart to someone, just to catch the bastard cheating with who proclaimed to be your best friend? While Izuku had no experience whatsoever in the love department, he was truly aware that such a pain was common grounds to turn to villainy. That's why he placed his hand on her shoulder, as an attempt to bring some level of comfort to the woman, late as it was. I'm sorry, Izuku said with honest words, trying to reach the woman, maybe even return her to the path of the heroes. For whatever it's worth, I can't imagine anyone cheating on someone as beautiful as you. Stop it, I'm not a Shotokan. Dronya's sudden answer made Izuku aware of how Megumin felt at such wording, much to the amusement of the raven-haired woman. Besides, I think it's time I tell you what you need to know. Dronya made a dramatic pause, conveying that the boy needed to pay special attention to her words. You want to own these slaves to set them free, right? Dronya asked in a rather grave voice, earning the full attention of the young druid beside her. You are thinking on being their hero by breaking their chains. Yes, that's the plan. Izuku replied without missing a beat, earning a sigh from the imperial woman. Do you oppose? It's not that I oppose. The noblewoman answered with a heavy voice, and a little bit of annoyance. It's that the whole world opposes. Wait, what? Izuku couldn't help but to scream his incredulity, accidentally scaring the harpy in the back of the wagon. Slavery on this world is sanctioned by the cults of the two goddesses. Dronya's answer earned a startled stare from the young boy. Yes, by the very same Iqua that tricked us into coming to this hecked-up world. Izuku made a mental note to sit down with a certain goddess when all this was over, and have a very long chat about everything that was wrong with slavery, assuming he didn't get any angrier, and decided to let his whips do the talking. Now, it's not like you can find young human girls in the slave market, at least not in this kingdom. Dronya wasn't helping to calm down her temporary employee. Slavery only applies to demi-humans, people with animal features. Humans, elves, dwarves and halflings are all considered as favored by the goddesses, and thus, it is illegal to enslave them. That explains why no one cared, Izuku muttered, earning a nod from the woman. Slaves, such as the two you want, are branded and cursed, so they can't disobey, betray or hurt their owner in any way or form. This brand also makes it impossible for them to survive away from their master. Dronya's explanation made Izuku's blood run cold, as that made their existence rather hellish. To make things worse, slaves of races like these two are both born and bred into slavery. Do you understand what I'm saying? Izuku was frozen in place, unable to cope with such cruelty. Dronya graced him with a sympathetic smile, as if understanding his shock. The brand was made by the one of the goddesses, and only said goddess can undo it. Dronya's words gave a little bit of hope to Izuku, as it meant that maybe Iqua would be able to free them. However, even if you somehow can contact that goddess and convince her to remove it, they don't know how to survive on their own. Dronya didn't wait for a reaction from the boy to turn to look at the two girls at the back of the wagon, showing a smug smile and a rather evil glint, making the poor girls shrink in fear. Hey, Scaly, Feathers, do you want to be free? Dronya's question threw Izuku for a loop, forcing him to turn to look at said girls, in hopes of hearing them say that they indeed wanted their freedom. No? Please don't throw us away. The harpy spoke in a raspy whisper, shaking at the very idea of being discarded. The reptilian girl at her side only had a pleading look on her eyes. We'll work twice as hard. Do you understand now? Dranya asked to a now sickly Izuku, who truly wanted to enact violent justice against the savages that damaged these girls, and any other slave. Half an hour later, Izuku and Dranya arrived at the entrance of the goblin's nest, having just a few hours before sunset, when the critters were more active, getting ready to exit and attack the innocent. It was time for the woman to reveal the true nature of her mission too. Well, I guess it is just fair for you to know what is this all about. Dranya spoke, earning the attention of the young druid. What I want, the only thing I came for, is to recover my stolen treasure. Izuku knew that something was wrong with the lady, but at the very least, it wasn't in a more sinister direction. 2 months ago, the son of a noble I used to work with stole my divine treasure, the cursed home known as the Tractatus Demonstrum. Dranya explained to a bewildered Izuku. The imbecile must have thought that he would be able to use its magnificent powers to gain fame and fortune. Apparently he had to find out the hard way that such divine treasures cannot be used by anyone else except the rightful owner. So, he died by his own hand. Izuku asked, feeling bad at wording such tragedy that way. He deserved it. Dranya answered without hesitation or remorse. Anyway, I only care for my treasure. After I get it, the girls are yours. Just like that? Izuku asked, his tongue having a foul taste yet again. Well, we have to complete the transaction at the guild, so everything is legal. Dranya replied, making a pause when she noticed the stare of the boy. Of course, if you feel confident on completing the goblin extermination quest, I won't stop you. I'd prefer if I could get my tome before attempting such a risky endeavor though. So, getting in, getting the book and getting out. Izuku asked as he watched the entrance of the cave, wishing that his bark skin and newly learned thorns would be enough to survive the attempt. I can do that, I think. Before you go in, here, take this. Dranya interrupted the boy while giving him a crystal ball. This is a sensor ball. It is attuned to this other crystal ball, which allows me to see the surroundings around the sensor. The book doesn't really look like a divine treasure, so I will need to tell you when you find it. Izuku watched both artifacts with an eye twitching, not knowing how to word how upset he was, both at himself for thinking such dangerous strategies, and at the woman for taking this long to speak of something so useful. What? It was Dranya's turn to be bewildered by Izuku's annoyed stare. About half an hour later, Dranya was equal parts scared and impressed. The boy before her was apparently the holder of a divine talent, because there was no other explanation for the absurd level of ingenuity displayed by the young druid. That seems to be a dead end, Dranya said as she and Izuku watched the crystal ball between them. That sword could fetch a good price though. Izuku had decided that no one would take any risk, so he took the sensor ball and tied it to his vine whip. Dranya had been understandably scared at the sight of the vine moving like a serpent. Then she watched in morbid fascination how the druid summoned a horde of fireflies that surrounded the sensor, which then followed it, as the vine made its way into the dark cave. Got it. Izuku replied as the sensor showed yet another vine grow and wrap around the sword, yanking it from the ground. Are you sure the gaudy book we found earlier is not your treasure? As the verdant appendage continued its trek through the cave, they had been able to find quite a few good items, like a golden rod with a beautiful ruby on its tip, the silver sword adorned with diverse jewels, and a book with an ivory cover. And yet, the woman insisted that her treasure should be in another direction. Don't look at me as if I'm greedy. Dranya replied with an annoyed glare, and still, she kept her voice in check. She was too close to recovering her treasure, so she couldn't afford to alienate this extremely useful partner. You're the one keeping all these expensive trinkets. I would like to keep these crystal balls. Izuku blurted out without thinking, as he couldn't help but to notice the tactical value they offered to his skill set. You like them? Dranya asked with a raised brow, making Izuku grimace. We can talk about a trade or a price, after you get your loot appraised at the guild. Dranya's suggestion caught the curiosity of the young druid, who decided to focus on the task at hand before thinking on the opportunity before him. Izuku wasn't blinded by the treasure though, because with each section explored, it became apparent that a lot of adventurers had lost their lives to this particular nest, if the amount of bones and rotten corpses were any indication. There it is. Dranya shouted in rarely heard happiness as she looked into the crystal ball, looking at what Izuku could only describe as junk. That's it? Izuku asked with incredulity at the sight of a rather small book with a leather cover full of stitches, and adorned with an eyeball. For real? For real? Dranya deadpanned, not wanting to lose any more time in getting her treasure back. Then they heard trouble. The sensor was suddenly shaken, and forcefully directed to look at a rather large goblin, probably the champion that led the horde. It wasn't like they hadn't found goblins during the exploration, but the dumb critters didn't react to the vines or fireflies like they were a threat. Instead they just poked at them and then retreated further in. It now dawned on the travelers that they had been reporting back to their leader. Oh no. Not when we are so close. Dranya was falling into despair, knowing that neither of them had been equipped to fight a goblin champion, and the ugly bastard would not let them recover the sensor. I don't have time for this, Izuku said in a rather cold voice, surprising the woman. Izuku had deemed these creatures evil, monsters that killed and destroyed just for fun, beasts that, just like rabid dogs, needed to be put down. That's why he didn't hesitate to test his new offensive skill. Ranya watched how yet another vine sprouted from below the censer, and as fast as a whip, it darted into the mouth of the snarling champion. Spikes abruptly sprouted from within the monster, killing him without a chance to fight back. What in the— Ranya couldn't believe what she was seeing, as the vine sprouted extremely long and sharp thorns that quickly murdered the goblins by the dozens, leaving no resistance left. Let's finish this already, Izuku said, sounding a little bit shaken after witnessing how lethal his new skill set had proven to be. It's getting late, and I don't want my teammates to worry about me. Ranya couldn't help but to think that this naive druid may be able to do it, to become the hero this hecked-up world needed, even if it didn't deserve him. Guild Hall by sunset. Izuku was actually squirming under the glare of the petite crimson demon, unable to deal with her adorable pout, unable to even try to defend his stance in the matter. Please, don't glare at our master. The raspy whispers of the harpy only seemed to make the petite arch-wizard angrier. Once back in town, Izuku and Ranya had the loot properly appraised, and after all the transactions and change of ownerships had been completed, Izuku had found himself with 3 million heirs to his name, 2 slaves at his command, and 2 crates full of female clothing and accessories. The 2 animal girls had been really surprised to be told to wear what they called pretty clothes, and even more than surprised when their new master had bought them real food, which they were eating at a table, and not off the floor. Since when do you have the money to purchase and maintain slaves? Megumin asked in a voice so serious it was almost hilarious, and yet, Izuku was beginning to sweat. I got them as part of the quest, Izuku replied, getting an even harder pout from the petite girl, and I will let you know that I can feed them, regardless of how much money I have. I can produce food, after all. Megumin still pouted, but now she directed her glare at the slaves that were now dressed in khaki shorts and green tunics, with both collars and cuffs removed, meaning that the druid had no intention on treating them like objects or cheap help. Her only actual fear was that the boy may actually be a demi-lover. I guess we now have some extra help at adventuring, Megumin finally conceded, plopping herself down at the table. You still have to treat me to dinner. You shouldn't have left without me. Not after I actually wasted a skill point on learning Produce Flame. Megumin's demand and confession actually brought a smile to the young druid, who was quick to order a large stack of fried toad for his explosive companion. The smile and change of demeanor for the Crimson Demon felt like much-needed medicine to Izuku, who really wanted to see things worth saving and protecting in this world. Hey, who brought these 2 to my table? The Qua's voice was what Izuku was waiting for, as he believed that this would be the best opportunity to see the goddess being useful and powerful. The Qua, I've been waiting for you. Izuku's words brought a sparkly smile to the arch-priestess, and a sour frown to the arch-wizard. Really? Megumin's voice was largely ignored, much to her increased annoyance. Oh? So, you are ready to recognize my greatness and praise my divine power. The Qua cheered, as it was due time she was praised and pampered by this quirkless idiot. Sure. Izuku started, earning the full attention of the blue-haired goddess. If you can remove the cursed brand from these 2. Of course I can. The Qua happily answered, earning a hopeful smile from the druid. I just won't do it. The Qua had been too happy to crush his hopes for this world, too willing to burn his desire to protect everyone. It was at that moment that Izuku Midoriya began to doubt his path as a hero, for no hero would align with such an evil deity as the one before him. A hero's promise. Izuku was having trouble getting to sleep, turning on his spot in the stables. He had more than enough money to rent a room in the inn, but thanks to the 2 new additions to his party, the innkeeper had to refuse to rent them a room. At the very least, he explained that an inspector from the capital was staying for the week, and said inspector was an adamant enemy of one of his new friends. Turns out, the goddess Eris hates harpies. Unable to send the bird girl alone to the stables, he opted to have them all together with him, as he couldn't bear staying in a comfortable room. Well, these 2 had to make do with a pile of hay, but both were soundly asleep while he was the uncomfortable one. This is a horrible world, Izuku thought as he turned to look at the black harpy, who was sleeping with a cute smile on her makeshift nest, seemingly uncaring of the horrible things she had endured so far. I promise I'll find a way to let you fly again, Chika. Chika was the name he had given to the black harpy. It was simple and unimaginative, and the girl was incredibly happy for it, even when Aqua pointed that it sounded like a pun. It was just after giving her this name that Izuku learned the horrors that she had to endure since birth, starting with a mandatory mutilation. According to the teachings of Eris, a harpy that is going to live amongst humans must have her tail and the thumb claws of her wings cut, so they can't either fly nor learn to use human tools. Izuku's heart ached at knowing this unethical practice, a religious practice nonetheless. He just couldn't believe that a goddess so loved by the masses could be so cruel. A religion that practices such horrible things can't be a good one, Izuku thought as he turned around, this time looking at the reptilian girl, a member of the lizard folk. And I will find a way to heal you too, Liza. Liza, the name he gave to the now identified Gatorkin girl. Well, the name was an even worse pun than the one given to the harpy. This time Aqua hesitated to laugh. Apparently, Gatorkin are a subspecies of lizard folk that far exceeds their cousins in strength and toughness, giving them muscles capable of bending iron barehanded, and resisting normal strikes with little damage. However, they were incredibly easy to anger, prone to violence, and apparently dumber than bricks. According to Chika, Liza was unable to follow the script given to her by the slave trader, not able to lie about her heritage, as the slaver wanted to pass her off as a regular lizard folk to a hunter. Her acting was so bad that the slaver opted for cutting her tongue in an attempt to make her look like her submissive cousins. Dranyu was still able to see what she truly was, giving her the upper hand in haggling for her price. Since the vile woman just needed extra bodies for her mission, she got it regardless of the possible hazards. Why can't the goddesses show a little bit of kindness? Izuku nearly screamed in his head, unable to cope with the fact that he had to travel with such an insensitive goddess. Is it too much to ask for some healing? While Aqua seemed to enjoy being uncooperative, Megumin showed a curious level of helpfulness. The explosive arch-wizard, noticing Izuku's need for an explanation, went into a long-winded retelling of the War of 1,000 years ago. The story told about a war that engulfed the entire continent, where demi-humans attempted to wipe out humans, elves and dwarves. The favored races fought separately in the beginning, none wanting to shame themselves asking for help, until the Avariel, a winged subspecies of elf, and the Duergar, a dark-skinned subspecies of dwarf, went extinct due to the cunning of the Harpies and the Lamias. It was at that moment that he learned that the Avariel were the beloved children of Eris, meaning that from that moment onward, Harpies became the direct enemies of the benevolent goddess. Megumin then got to the part that marked the turn of the war, and the beginning of the Age of Heroes, as it was at that point that a human hero appeared and united the three races against the demi-humans, earning victory after victory, pushing the threat back until they no longer had the numbers to continue. Then, the hunt continued until the strongest races of demi-humans went extinct, and the remnants were forced to live in small tribes that had been hunted down by slavers to this day. Izuku was horrified by this information, and while he could understand Eris's anger, he could not condone this barbarism. He, being Japanese, knew better than anyone else that this hatred was wrong, because condoning it would be like saying that it's alright to wipe out from existence all of the German and Japanese people, as retaliation for the Second World War. Once all was said and done, Megumin asked something that made Izuku smile with sadness. You bought them so they wouldn't suffer in the Empire, right? The petite arch-wizard didn't wait for an answer, and instead said that she will get him a book that will help in dealing with the girls. Then Aqua asked about the sleeping arrangements. I will not share my room with someone like her. Izuku mentally screamed as he forced his eyes shut. The next morning, this is bad. Izuku thought in panic as he took notice of his situation. This is really bad. As usual, at least since he became a druid, Izuku woke up with the first light of the morning. Unlike before, he did so today with two female bodies hugging him. At some point during the night, Chika and Liza moved to the sides of the now flustered teenager, hugging his body and using his chest as a pillow. It wasn't uncomfortable at all, but it was incredibly shocking for the green-haired boy. While thinking on how to get out of this situation, Izuku felt how Liza's tail moved, curling tighter around his waist, moving up and down his crotch, making his already awkward morning wood even worse. There, girls. Could you please wake up? Izuku asked, unsure if he should just shake them awake, or be kind and gentle about it. Then he felt Chika's feathers gently caressing his abdomen, as if she was placing a blanket over him. Never mind. Wake up already. Izuku finally moved with the intention of waking the girls up, and while he raised his voice, he couldn't bring himself to yell. Chika was quick to open her eyes in alarm, taking a second to look at her new master with a little bit of fear, as if expecting a beating. Seeing it wasn't coming, she relaxed, mourning. Chika did her best to step away from her master to avoid getting in his way, rising to her feet with the little grace she could muster, obviously awaiting orders. Liza, however, seemed to have trouble disentangling from the warm body she had latched onto, her cold-blooded body demanding more cuddle time. That this was the first time a human had given her such a level of warmth wasn't helping her cause. Come on, Liza. Izuku raised his voice just a little more, barely earning a reaction from the gator girl. We have a lot to do today. Seeing that kind words weren't enough, and feeling his body starting to react the wrong way, he decided to take things into his own hands, or rather, Vines. Liza finally woke up with a start as she felt her heavy body being forcefully lifted from her warm bed, only to discover that she was being held up by vines that looked way too close to whips for comfort. Izuku locked eyes with the albino reptilian, and after a second, he gently placed her on the ground, standing, and without following retaliation. Now that you two are awake, Izuku addressed the slaves with a serious voice, making the poor girls go stiff at the idea of being disciplined. Get dressed. You need to get your adventure cards today, and I'm sure you'll want something solid for breakfast. The girls blinked in surprise, finding it hard to believe that their new master hadn't approached the morning as they expected, for he neither tried to use their bodies for pleasure, as they were trained to accept, nor attempt to hurt them as retaliation for inconveniencing him. The fact that it was giving them privacy was also of note. Later at the guild hall, Izuku was proven yet again that this world was twisted and dark. This is ridiculous. Izuku muttered it himself as he looked at the cards in his hand. What's wrong with these rules? When brought to the counter and the registration artifact, Luna indicated that the two demi-humans would not get adventure cards like him. Instead, they will be registered like add-ons of his card. The cards in his hand were actually slave cards, meaning that he would be responsible for their growth and actions during adventuring. To make things worse, these cards actually had cost thrice as much as his own registration, almost as if it was meant as a deterrent to see demi-humans grow stronger. It's not exactly wrong. Megumin, who was by his side while sporting a frown, said in apparent response to his quiet muttering. Demi-humans under the adventurer status tend to grow faster than humans, meaning that if left unchecked they can become a threat. Megumin's explanation may have held true, but that didn't change the fact that Izuku hated how restricted these two girls were. When he had finished registering his slaves as part of his adventuring party, he had met with the petite arch-wizard, who, true to her word, had brought a book that detailed the biology and roles of demi-humans in society. The book also contained the basic set of rules to follow with the ownership of these slaves on the different regions of the continent, as well as suggestions on how to deal with their instincts. Needless to say, Izuku wasn't pleased with the new information. So, Megumin continued as she came to the realization that Izuku was not going to follow her previous statement. What do you intend to do with them? Megumin's question was aimed to help her understand the green-haired druid, his heart and inclinations, and if possible, proclivities. The Crimson Demon had become really interested in the young boy before her, especially the way he gave her attention that was diminishing due to the new additions to the party having it instead of her. I'm going to find a way to restore their bodies. Izuku answered without missing a beat, making a Kwa choke on her drink, and Megumin to slightly pout. Then I'll teach them to be self-sufficient. You do understand that no priest is going to help you with that, don't you? The Kwa asked, feeling amused at the spirit of the boy, and sickened by how pure his intentions were. According to the library, I can learn restoration magic if I become an archdruid. Izuku's word cut deep into the goddess's pride, as she believed herself to be the only one the druid could turn to. That also means I can ask other archdruids for help. The Kwa actually felt hurt by Izuku's words. She had been thinking on offering her help on that regard, after making him grovel and beg for it, of course. Don't you think you are going a little too far for just two demi-human slaves? Megumin asked, trying her best to hide her growing annoyance. I think it would be easier if you just look for some noble or guild attendant to take them off your hands. Even an inner tavern may do so if they prove to be skilled enough. Chika and Liza watched as the conversation kept going, knowing that these girls were talking about them, with no little animosity toward them, obviously wanting their new master to get rid of them. They also paid attention to how Izuku's face had been contorting in an odd mix of anger and sadness. Chika was a step shy of hugging him to calm his mind, for she had felt that he didn't dislike her feathers. Liza was getting ready to bite the one who was annoying her master the most. Then someone else arrived at their table. I just happened to read your recruitment poster. A dignified voice made the party turn to meet the new arrival, who turned out to be a young woman. I was wondering if you still have space in your party. The young woman was tall and looked fit to be a warrior. Her long blonde hair was tied in a tall ponytail, and had bangs over her forehead, making her look beautiful and serious. Her fair skin and chiseled features could easily make most guys fall for her. The new arrival was wearing a long yellow coat with pieces of armor that gave credence to her strength, although her asymmetrical shoulder pads confused the young druid a little bit. Yes, we are still recruiting. Izuku replied with neutrality, internally grateful that this new arrival was wearing something that would cover her sensitive parts, unlike others he had met before. Advanced job classes only. The Kwa immediately added, not wanting any more weak members in her party. Don't mind her. Izuku cut in just as fast, knowing better than to let the poor excuse of the goddess take the reins. Common sense is more than enough to get in. A modicum of skill would be appreciated too. Megumin joined too, subtly thinking that Izuku was weak to girls needing rescue. Suddenly, the dignified female warrior seemed to be replaced by someone completely different. There's no need to worry, I'm a crusader of the Air's faith. The young woman replied, making two of the assembled party wonder why she didn't say anything about common sense or skill first. My name is Darkness, and I would like if you let me join your PP party. Izuku's mood was soured when the crusader declared her faith. He would have loved to give her a chance, regardless of the lack of mention at skill levels or common sense, but now he feared that she would try to do something against Chika, who was now cowering behind him. I don't think that's a good idea. Megumin was the first to pass judgment, earning a sad sigh from the green-haired druid. What are you talking about? The Kwa spoke in uncharacteristic empathy. She is a crusader, an advanced elite class. She can be a knight commander, and it would still be a bad idea to let her join. Izuku passed judgment now. While he loathed showing prejudice to someone based only on faith, this time he felt as if not needing to risk his friend to receive more suffering. What? Darkness seemed to be distraught by such rejection. Why? Darkness was despairing, wondering if rumors about her had reached this new party already, or if she had said something wrong. A new girl appeared behind her and tapped her shoulder, earning her attention. Didn't I tell you to not be so pushy? The newcomer asked with a friendly voice, earning the party's attention. The girl was shorter than Darkness. Her silver hair was caught before reaching her shoulders, and her purple eyes seemed rather playful. Izuku took notice of her rather daring outfit, leaving way too much skin exposed. Although it was less outrageous than some others he had already seen, her demeanor and the dagger she kept at her back screamed thief to the druid's mind. Besides, why would you join someone with that kind of baggage? The new girl continued, this time pointing to the cowering Chika, who tried to become even smaller behind Izuku's back. Even with the knowledge and understanding that this prejudice was inevitable, Izuku found himself tensing at the words of the newcomer. There was no need to ask, it was obvious for how they interacted that both shared the same faith, and in his mind, it would be logical to think that they would try to start a fight in order to show the strength of their belief. Megumi noticed how Izuku tensed, aware of the situation that would probably develop. Then she noticed Liza tensing, as an obvious result of her master getting ready for a confrontation. After a moment, she became aware that she was now gripping her staff as well. Who's being pushy now, Chris? Darkness replied, apparently oblivious to the tension in the air, and apparently being more open-minded than what Izuku thought. The harpy seems well tamed, there is no need to denounce her as evil. Denouncing Chika as evil. That made Izuku frown. That is still a harpy. Chris pointed out, not ready to drop the subject, they are cunning and manipulative. Why don't you ask her owner to show her stats? I don't want to, and I don't have to. Izuku was quick to put a stop to the two ladies in front of him, making Megumin blink in surprise at how angry he sounded. Please, find someone else to bother. Izuku had had enough of these people, in fact, he'd had enough of this world. Last night he had the fleeting thought of parting ways with the Kwa, and make do with Megumin and the slaves, and now, that fleeting thought was beginning to take root. Attention to all adventurers, please head to the main gate for the compulsory harvest event. The announcement, coming from the loudspeakers, was enough to break the tension. Izuku was understandably puzzled by the sudden call, especially when everyone ignored him to walk towards the gates of the city. Having no reason to refuse a compulsory quest, he and his slaves followed the others to see what was happening. Later at the gates of Axel, Izuku was, for lack of a better word, dumbstruck. All around him, the veterans and green adventurers were busy trying to fight off the swarming enemies, trying their very best to rack up kills as quickly as possible. It didn't matter if the adventurer was small and nimble, big and slow, or adept with magic, all of them were doing their best to deal with the numerous enemies. I don't understand, Izuku muttered to himself, his brain having trouble to accept the scene unfolding before him. The massive army swarming the gates of the city consisted of flying cabbages, plant creatures that had no other way of attacking, but to use their own bodies to tackle whatever stood on their way. They weren't intelligent either, as they blindly moved forward with absolute disregard to their own health. I'll protect you. Darkness's shout reached Izuku, who turned her way to see her being constantly hit by cabbages, while using her body as a shield to protect a couple of adventurers that had fallen to the constant attacks of the little creatures. Izuku's image of the Crusader had made a massive shift in the few minutes that he had seen her in action. Buried now were the fears of having to deal with some sort of Inquisitor, for even him, with his natural inclination to see the good in the people, couldn't help but to notice the face of pleasure that the Crusader was making at being constantly hit, while pieces of her armor were being ripped off from her attire. She was a masochist, a very perverted masochist. This is stupid, Izuku muttered as he gave up on making sense of this insanity. According to what he could understand, this was a yearly event in which adventurers aimed to kill and collect the cabbages, earning money as they were considered a valuable ingredient of the region. There was also lettuce flying around, and Izuku was surprised to hear that it was considered a subpar ingredient. "1. Chika's whispery voice announced her participation in the event, if only because a stray cabbage was flying at her absent-minded master. Izuku had no real intention of partaking in such stupidity, but he still had patted the black harpy for her effort at keeping him safe. The young druid was also thinking about the thief's request to see the stats of the harpy, and that made him uncomfortable. He had noticed at the instant he got her slave card, her intelligence was high enough that Luna had advised him to keep her away from any magic tomes or artifacts. It was an unfounded fear though. How was she supposed to apply the somatic components of the spells? Speaking of magic, explosion. Megumin fired her signature spell, right on top of the masochistic darkness. Izuku had to admit that it was a sound tactical decision, because darkness was being assaulted by what amounted to 80% of the cabbage army, and by how she was able to remain standing, it had been obvious that she was right to believe that the Crusader would be able to tank it. Izuku was exceptionally grateful that the booming sound masked the sounds of an orgasm. Maybe I should invest in a carriage, Izuku muttered as things seemed to wind down, earning tilted heads from Chika and Liza. If I stay here, I won't become strong, and I may end up snapping at someone. The moment the words left his lips, Liza grimaced, as if expecting herself to be the reason for her master's distress. Upon seeing this, Izuku decided to scratch her jawline, making her return to a neutral expression. Izuku didn't fail to notice her tail waving, signaling her happiness at receiving positive attention. Second wave. The sudden scream made Izuku turn and look for the danger, feeling extremely irritated by the situation. He could have simply left the area, but upon noticing Megumin's limp body, and darkness kneeling down gasping in ecstasy, he decided to become a shield for the dozen adventurers that were out of commission. This is ridiculous. Izuku said to himself as he began to expand several vines around him, quickly intertwining them to make a large net. Why do I have to be the only one to come with a plan to protect everyone? Izuku asked to no one as the net was completed, then he spent a large amount of mana to reinforce it. Because Master is a hero. Chika asked, her whispery voice unheard by the rest of the adventurers, but her words carried enough weight to hit the young druid. Izuku didn't know it, but he had talked in his sleep, seeing the academy he wanted to attend, and the title he desired so much. Liza of course didn't know what all that meant, but Chika was quick to take those words to heart. After all, belonging to a hero was quite a lofty goal. I like the way that sounds. Izuku replied with a smile as he raised the net, just as the second wave of cabbages arrived at the gates. Much to everyone's surprise, the net worked, preventing the passage of a massive quantity of cabbages, preventing more injuries among the already downed adventurers. They were so surprised that no one moved to make a kill of the stuck cabbages, and soon the sheer numbers of the little critters began to move the net. Liza, let's help Master. Chika cried in distress, not wanting her master to carry all the weight. Izuku almost lost concentration when Chika raised her voice. The high-pitched sound was almost like nails on a chalkboard, making him understand why she was so whispery. The gator girl was quick to act though, grabbing the end of the net and applying all her strength and weight to prevent it from moving any further, while the harpy took the other end with her talons, furiously flapping her wings to aid in such endeavor. What are you all waiting for? Pick up the stragglers. Izuku shouted to the gawking adventurers, who immediately snapped out of their stupor. Izuku watched the rest of the adventurers go, just to notice that instead of helping him, they all went their separate ways to rack up separate kill counts. It was madness, stupidity at its worst, and Izuku was tired of it. Master. Chika's horrendous voice rang yet again, this time accompanied by a pained face. Obviously she lacked the strength and endurance to keep up with such a monumental task. Fine. I'll do it myself. Izuku shouted as he activated spike growth, turning the net into a wall of extremely long and sharp thorns, skewering all the cabbages in an instant, which made the net full of impaled cabbages. The sounds of the battle stopped, and everyone turned to see the image of an angry Izuku watching over an impaled army. All the spellcasters were wondering what kind of spell he had used, as they couldn't recognize such an effect. Later that afternoon, at the guild hall, Izuku found himself baffled yet again. Apparently, cabbages were worth good coin, especially this year after such a bountiful harvest. Not to mention that the second wave he stopped seemed to be of better quality than the first, earning him more money than what the guild could handle in a single transaction. Master, did we do well? Chika asked, for herself and for Liza, who looked expectantly at the green-haired druid. You did fantastic. Izuku replied as he patted the two girls, both of you. Both girls enjoyed the attention like a drug, neither used to getting praised or rewarded. It didn't help that Izuku ordered both fried frog and cabbage stir-fry to reward them. Izuku had to admit that watching Chika and Liza being happy was filling his heart with a sense of accomplishment. Their smiles felt like a curative balm that was easing the pain produced by the world around him. He still wished Megumin could stop glaring at him whenever she thought he wasn't looking. What do you mean I'm getting no money? The qua's screech, while not as harmful as Chika's unfiltered voice, still made Izuku cringe, forcing him to look at the ex-goddess, as she continued to shake poor Luna, who was doing her best to avoid her breasts becoming exposed, due to the manhandling of her clothes. For what Izuku managed to understand, the qua managed to catch mostly lettuce, of poor quality to make it worse. Being an ingredient that was not sought, she was offered what amounted a pittance for the bulk of it. By the end of it, she turned to look at the young druid with nothing but anger, then her face erupted into a cute smile with sparkling eyes. Izuku. Izuku. The qua called in a cutesy voice, approaching the druid like he was her favorite person in the world. Izuku found the scene sickening. How much did you get for your cabbages? The qua asked, probably trying to sound friendly, not that Izuku didn't notice her greedy eyes. After all, he had a rather large bag full of coins in the table before him. 2 million. Izuku deadpanned, deciding to come clean and say what he had at hand to test the integrity of the goddess, not that he expected a good outcome from her. Silence filled the guild hall. Every pair of eyes were glued on the druid at the mention of such an outrageous amount of money in a single pouch. Izuku wasn't being honest though. While the bag in front of him indeed held 2 millionaires, his pocket contained a note for another 2, meaning that he had quite enough money to live without trouble for a time. The idea of not working was quickly erased from his mind though, as he needed to get equipment for himself and his girls. He still had trouble referring to Chika and Liza as his. 2 mil, the qua seemed to be at a loss for words, and then she tried to hug him. Izuku. My dear friend. My dear, handsome man. What do you want? Izuku was not amused in the slightest by the obvious greed in the eyes of the blue-haired archpriestess. Lend me some money. The qua nearly demanded, although she looked actually distressed. No? Izuku deadpanned, obviously not wanting to feed whatever vice pulled at the heart of the selfish goddess. Please. You have to help me. The qua resorted to wailing now, crying as she clung to Izuku's clothes, making quite the scene in the guild hall, with murmurs being quick to start all around. I took a large loan, thinking I would hit it big with the harvest. How was I supposed to know that I'd only catch filthy lettuce? How is it my problem? Izuku's question felt like cold water, for he sounded as if uncaring of her problems. Izuku had no intention to help the goddess with her petty problems. She had done more than enough against him and his poor heart to have him not wanting to waste his efforts on her. Because, the claw started, quickly showing a fearful face and a hesitant voice. I already spent all the money, and they want their payment today, and they'll take it in whatever form they see fit, if I don't have the money. The claw explained as she turned to look at a group of thugs. One of them was already licking a dagger while leering at her. Izuku sighed, hating himself for not being able to turn her away, even when she didn't deserve any mercy for her behavior, especially because she had denied her help at healing Chika and Liza. Healing Chika and Liza. That gave Izuku an idea. Fine, I'll help you. Izuku replied with a sigh, not failing to notice Megumin pouting again. A simple head pat was enough to calm her though. Eh? You are the best. The claw cried in joy while extending her hands, obviously expecting Izuku to handle his humongous bag of coins to her. Izuku instead motioned for the thugs to approach their table, much to Aqua's confusion. You don't trust her, do you? Megumin asked with a smug face. When she first joined, she had assumed that the archpriestess was close to Izuku, but just 2 days had been enough to prove the contrary. Of course, she wouldn't mind if the blue-haired girl were to leave the party, giving her more time with the green-haired boy. Not in the slightest. Izuku replied, earning a click of the tongue from Aqua, who of course had expected Izuku to be naive enough to hand her the bag, without asking for a specific quantity. Are you in need of a loan, kid? The leader of the thugs asked in an all-business voice, obviously noticing the large bag full of coins, or did the big spender convince you to help her with her debt? Izuku threw a glare at Aqua upon hearing the moniker, wondering just how much trouble the girl had stirred. Not exactly. Izuku replied while holding a hand up, demanding to be heard. She is a member of my party, and I can't have her missing right now. Of course, I can't condone her bad habit of wasting money, so, instead of just paying her debt, I want to buy her debt. The thugs and Megumin were not expecting that response. Izuku had read enough to know that people like this worked within the limits of the law, meaning that the loan was given upon signing a magical contract. This magical contract gave them the rights to the winnings and savings of the adventure, until the debt is fully covered, and while they were unable to force the person into unsavory things like thievery or prostitution, it didn't stop the person from falling into such practices to pay the money. Izuku fully intended to make use of said contract to force Aqua to bend to his demands. We are not against such a thing, the leader replied after finding his voice, returning to his business visage. But you must be made aware that this little bitch took a lot of money, and we have to charge a little extra for the transference of the contract. How much? Izuku asked, already feeling a knot forming on his stomach. Including the transference cost and the guild fee for the transaction of the magical parchment, the leader took a moment before delivering the number, 1,200,000 heirs. Izuku and Megumin were frozen on the spot as the reality of the size of the debt hit them. Even the slaves seemed horrified by such a large number for just a simple debt. What? Megumin was the first to recover, glaring at the archpriestess, as if the money had come from her own pocket. How? On what did you waste all that money? Fine, I'll buy her debt. Izuku replied after a few seconds, standing up to follow the thugs to a private room in the back of the guild. I'll be getting my money's worth in favors before the day ends anyway. At Izuku's words, Aqua paled, unable to imagine what kind of favors the green-haired druid would ask of her that would be worth such money. Why do I suddenly feel like cattle? Aqua's question was left unanswered as Megumin focused on her meal. Even the slaves were more interested on looking at their plates than paying attention to the ex-goddess. Little did Aqua know that Izuku's plan included breaking her spirit and pride to get his way. An undying warm heart. On a table inside the Adventurers Guild, a blonde crusader watched events unfold at a neck-breaking pace. It took only a minute and a few selected words, but the world for a blue-haired archpriestess had come down crashing and burning. All because a green-haired druid was angry. Was I unclear? Izuku asked as he continued eating his cabbage stir-fry. Is there anything you need me to explain? Chika and Liza were sure there was no need to explain things anymore, but their master was such a kind-hearted man. The way Megumin smiled with such smugness also contributed to the feeling that their master couldn't be in the wrong. Why? The Qua's trembling voice did nothing to sway the heart of the druid, who felt that his proposal was not only fair, but a good bargain. Why do you have to be so evil? Evil? Izuku asked with a voice that denoted that he was completely against such a notion. What's evil about my terms? Megumin gave a small chuckle, but otherwise said nothing. The archwizard had the firm idea that the druid wanted to be rid of the troublesome girl. It was so easy to see her either breaking and acceding to his petition, followed by leaving due to outrage, or flee from the place not wanting to be anywhere near the druid, due to the harshness of his actions. It was a win-win scenario. Even the fact of seeing him getting his way didn't bother her in the slightest. Darkness couldn't reign in her emotions though. This is incredible. Darkness shouted as she slammed her fists on the table while standing up, gaining everyone's attention. To think that you'll force an archpriest of the Axis cult to act against her goddess, Darkness stated while her shoulders trembled, with the threat to keep her in a lifetime of forced servitude while suffering poverty and misery. The trembling voice and arms, coupled with the intensity of her words, made Chika and Liza tense, getting ready to jump to their master's defense, even when they knew that it would be impossible for them to defeat a fully fledged crusader. I knew it. It was impossible for my instincts to be wrong. Darkness nearly shouted as she almost jumped at the green-haired boy, falling to her knees while hugging his waist in an easily misunderstood scene. Please. Let me join your party. While Izuku had forgotten about the proclivities of the blonde crusader, he still couldn't understand what was so evil about his proposal. The proposal was simple, and even in the favor of the ex-goddess. She just had to choose between using her sacred restoration magic on Chika and Liza, or have 90% of her winnings taken until her debt was paid in full. Izuku is not wrong. Megumin finally spoke, with a smug smile that betrayed how much she was enjoying the idea of being left almost alone with the druid. The temple charges around 300,000 to 500,000 heirs for the casting of a full restore spell. Even if you were to charge maximum price, you'll still be paying less than what you owe. That's a bargain. Izuku sent a smile and a nod toward the petite archwizard, not knowing that she was actually making things worse for Aqua. He now was starting to sob. If I do that, Aqua began to say between sobs, my precious worshippers will lose faith. Izuku didn't like making a scene, but he wasn't going to relent on his plan. He would be compensated for the debt, one way or another. I think you need space to come to a decision, so, Izuku started while standing up, having finished his food, and making sure his girls were done too. Darkness still held onto him like a drunk to a bottle though. We'll go shopping while you think about what to do. Izuku's words were directed to Chika, Liza and Megumin. All three beamed at the idea of getting gifts from the young druid. Then Izuku noticed he couldn't walk. You're including me in your group, right? Darkness asked with hopeful eyes, trying really hard to get accepted. Then she found herself wrapped in Izuku's vine whips. Sorry. Izuku replied while prying the crusader from himself. He still found impossible to lift her even with his superior leverage. Useful party members only. For a moment, just a moment, Darkness thought that finally she would get what she wanted. She imagined it, a humiliating dressing down, being whipped for being so pushy, maybe even see the whips growing those beautiful thorns. Since you aren't a member of this party, you can't come. Izuku's words came as calm, even kind, leaving the crusader just at the side and a small distance away from him. He didn't retract the vines though, he just cut them, leaving the masochist blonde tied in place. Darkness had been left speechless. It was the first time she had met someone who treated her with cordiality, other than her father. Her shock was so big that she couldn't react until after Izuku, Megumin, and the slaves had left the guild. This is not how you use whips. Darkness finally snapped, unable to decide if this was an act of kindness, or the druid's way of torturing her. You didn't even use thorns. A little bit later, at one of the local blacksmiths. It's alright for Chika to have this. The Black Harpy's raspy whispers did nothing to hide her surprise and delight. She never had anything of her own, and now not only did she have pretty clothes, but armor too. Isn't it too expensive for just Chika? Izuku couldn't help but to chuckle at how happy Chika was. It was also a little bit sad to know that such a simple thing was reason to celebrate. He also didn't know that for a slave to be given armor was a declaration of being treasured. Still, Chika continued to stare at the pieces of armor that had been added to her attire. A chest piece that covered her breasts and back, but didn't impede the flexibility of her abdomen. Leggings covered the external part of her legs from the waist to her knees, firmly secured by a thick belt, all of this made of studded leather, properly layered to maximize protection while not sacrificing any agility or mobility, and when the time came, flight capability. Don't worry about it, Chika. I want you to stay as safe as possible. That being said, I'd rather you dodge out of harm's way instead of testing the durability of that armor. Izuku replied with a smile, showing how much he cared for the harpy. Then he turned to the gator girl. How about you, Liza? As she flexed her body to test the mobility of her new armor, the gator girl gave an appreciative nod. Her muscles and scales were hard enough to count as armor against most cutting weapons, and most of the common beasts out there. Still, Izuku bought armor made from animal hide for her. The hardened hide, topped with the coarse furs of the beasts it was made of, provided an excellent buffer against blunt impacts, and an extra layer of defense against piercing blows. Izuku knew for a fact that Liza was not exactly well versed on evasion, so he had to assume that covering weaknesses was a must. The one thing he didn't know was if he should be grateful about or not, was the fact that neither was skilled enough to use a weapon. Are you sure I need this? Megumin asked as she tested the one piece of equipment that Izuku bought for her. I still think I only need staves and accessories. Izuku had bought special soles and shin guards, designed to be placed over her own boots. They didn't look ugly, but the contrast with the rest of her costume was quite obvious. The last thing I need is you slipping while casting, or while running away in a scenario where you can't cast. Izuku patiently explained. Besides, what if a snake decides to bite your feet while you are unable to move? Why did you had to bring that up? Megumin almost yelled in response, immediately remembering all the tales of powerful mages being taken down by common vermin. Due to their lack of foot protection, I'm going to have nightmares now. As she finished, the petite archwizard turned away from the green-haired druid, trying her best to hide her wavering smile and crimson cheeks. The attention and care of the boy was way too delightful to ignore, although it still bothered her that he was just as attentive and caring toward the slaves. Izuku only chuckled a little bit at her words, knowing that such dangers could be easily counteracted with his skills. With his latest conquest against the army of cabbages, he had learned a couple of extra skills. Analyze plants. The skill allowed him to understand the properties and workings of any plant he consumed or touched for 30 minutes. Modify plants. The skill allowed him to add or remove properties from any plant he touches for an hour, or select the properties of plants he created. He had planned to make his skills better by adding properties to the vines, thorns and berries. The rest of the points were of course spent in making his passives better. Isn't Master going to get armor too? Chika suddenly asked, eyeing the young druid with worry. Master needs to be protected too. Chika's raspy whispers were followed by a shaky wing, pointing to a massive set of plate armor. It was obvious that she wanted him to be as safe as possible. Liza, furiously nodding, seemed to confirm that too. I do intend to get some armor, Izuku replied, trying to make the girls feel better, for even Megumin seemed to want to see him clad in some form of protective gear. But plate, well, Izuku was at a loss of words. He just couldn't picture himself donning such a massive amount of metal, and yet, he feared that his bark skin would end up failing him at the most critical moments. Oh right. Megumin suddenly interrupted, druids can't use metal equipment. You may want to check leather and scale armors. Megumin's intervention earned her another head pat from the green-haired teen. Actually, Izuku started his reply with a smile, and rather curiosity on his eyes. I would like to find something made with ironwood or bark. The last words were directed to the blacksmith, who didn't look pleased in the slightest. Do I look like an elven woodcarver? The words of the tall balding man were rather cold, although not as much due to the money he had gotten by charging extra for selling armor to a couple of demi-human slaves. Outside an odd-looking shop, some time later, Izuku and the girls looked at the shop before them with some skepticism. After asking around the blacksmiths and shops on the main road of the town, he had gotten directions to this secluded shop. According to rumors, the owner was an eccentric woman who was known for buying pretty much anything that was not ordinary, even if it was useless. That included rare equipment and magic items. I don't think we'll find a full set of armor here, Megumin stated as she looked through the large window, seeing a lot of trinkets and rather mundane-looking items. I think I see a couple of staves and orbs though. It's okay, I don't need a full set of armor. Izuku immediately replied while opening the door to the shop. Getting you a few accessories may be a good idea. What do you mean by? Megumin's question was quickly forgotten as her immature mind caught fire due to a sudden thought. Wait, accessories like a ring. Why did you directly jump to a ring? Izuku asked as he entered and held the door open for Megumin and the slave girls. Are you trying to tell me something? Izuku had taken to teasing the petite arch-wizard, not because he wanted to incite something from her, but because he knew that by pushing such notions, she would be the one to take a defensive stance, and postpone any romantic involvement. Rings are comfortable and easy to wear. Megumin replied with a deep crimson blush. Don't get the wrong idea. Before Izuku could say something to calm down his petite companion, they heard steps coming from deep within the shop. Hello. A young and beautiful woman appeared from behind a curtain that served as a door of sorts to the back of the shop. Can I help you with something? The young woman had a face that spoke of kindness, brown eyes that seemed to radiate hopes and dreams, and a caring smile. Long brown hair cascaded all the way to her lower back, with bangs showing at her shoulders, and a small portion covering her right eye. The hook at the top of her head seemed to try to give her a cute aura, which contrasted against how sexy her ample breasts made her look. Izuku made sure to keep his eyes on her face as much as possible, not that he hasn't noticed her purple robe with yellow trim. Yes. Izuku managed to reply, although his voice quivered just enough for Megumin to pout. We are looking for some magical accessories and items made of ironwood or bark. Well, if you expect to find something made from ironwood, the beautiful woman started, but then stopped when her eyes finally landed on the demi-human girls, especially on Chika. It's a black harpy. The woman suddenly exclaimed, although she didn't sound upset. Yuck. Chika's startled scream was terrible enough to make Megumin fall to her knees while covering her ears, and even make one of the windows crack, but it didn't seem to bother the now jumpy woman. Izuku had been frozen by the sudden reaction, especially when the harpy jumped behind him for protection. That had the unintended consequence of having the beautiful woman being way too close for comfort. Those feathers are so beautiful. They will make beautiful accessories and cloaks. The woman began to ramble, scaring the green-haired druid out of his mind, not to mention making Chika shiver in horror at the idea of having her feathers puckered. Please sell them to me, when they fall due to plumage changing, of course. Please, Izuku barely was able to speak. Some space. Izuku's plea came in the face of having such beautiful woman being nearly on top of him, something he wasn't ready to deal with. Fortunately, Liza was quick to grab the woman by the back of her collar, lift her, and place her a couple of meters away. Thanks, Liza. Izuku's words were enough for the gator girl to wave her tail in obvious happiness, even when her face remained as stoic as ever. Can we do business now, miss? Far from being upset at the sudden treatment, the beautiful young woman smiled so brightly that Megumin couldn't help but to pout even harder. Right, sorry. The young woman apologized for her rudeness with a polite bow, making it clear for Izuku that bras didn't exist in this world. "My name is Wiz. Welcome to my magic shop." Meanwhile, at the guild hall, "This is unbelievable," Darkness muttered as she witnessed the archpriestess going through several stages of panic and distress. To make her suffer like this, even from a distance. The very first thing Aqua tried when Izuku had left the guild was to approach the loaners to ask for more money. She had to learn the hard way that she would not able to take on a new loan until the last one was paid in full. Having her pride and dignity stolen, Darkness continued her muttering, while watching the blue-haired girl wail in absolute despair, the tears, the sobs. Aqua's second attempt was to call upon the entirety of her sect, not even bothering to hide that she was the actual goddess of the Axis cult, although everyone in the vicinity just looked at her like she was delusional. After her long incantation, and wasting a rather massive amount of mana, she turned toward the nearest priest she could see. With a bright smile, and the confidence brought by being a divine figure, she had demanded monetary help to free herself from her woes. She was faced with the fact that her religion consisted of the least amount of followers, and thus, fewer active priests. The heiress priest had admonished her for calling herself a goddess, but still left her a couple of coins as a show of benevolence. "I can't take it anymore," Darkness finally shouted while slamming her hands on the table. "I need to be in his party." While Darkness was daydreaming about the possibilities of being in the party of a certain green-haired druid, Aqua had gone to the reception desk in a desperate move. "There has to be some easy and fast quest that awards $1 million." Aqua screeched as she manhandled Luna's dress, much to the distress of the counter lady, and the absolute delight of the male adventurers. "There has to. There is no way I'm becoming the slave of that simpleton. Please calm down." Luna tried her best to remain polite, calling on all her years of dealing with weird adventurers. "The best I can offer you are fetch quests, or if you get enough party members, a giant toad hunt." Luna's reply only brought more tears to the ex-goddess, as she knew it would be impossible for her to earn enough money that way. Fetch quests, the ones that could be done solo, rarely awarded more than 100 heirs after completion, and while giant toad bounties ranked up in the thousands, hunting such prey required a party, and that meant dividing the money between everyone, a detriment that worked against her needs. "Aqua," Darkness called as she placed a hand on the shoulder of the distressed ex-goddess, earning her attention. "There are actually 2 ways for you to get out of this predicament." "Really?" Aqua asked, full of hope and tears. "Yes, indeed," Darkness replied with a serious face. "But for me to reveal them, you need to register me in your party." About an hour later, Izuku and his group entered the guild hall with satisfied smiles and new items. Megumin looked really proud of her new necklace, an enchanted item that helped her recover mana at an increased rate of 5%, while Izuku held a walking cane made of a rather shiny wood. At least he had learned that anything named iron wood was false, as only the bark was workable. Along with the cane, he had also acquired new clothes. Leather boots, linen pants and a green tunic were covered by a rather cozy-looking hooded robe, made of some elven fabric that the shop owner, Wiz, couldn't remember the name of. It wasn't cheap, but Izuku was instantly drawn to the beautiful vibrant green of the piece of clothing, and how it gave off an emerald shine when hit by the light in the right places. It wasn't made for stealth, he supposed, but it did fit his personality and role as a druid, who didn't feel the need to hide. "Well, that went well," Izuku said as he and his entourage walked to their table. "It certainly was a good shopping trip." Megumin added as she caressed her piece of jewelry. She could have gotten a ring, but the idea made her blush so profusely that she believed she would faint if Izuku ever placed the metal band on her finger. "Master looks so handsome," Chika added with her raspy whispers, being seconded by a furious nodding from Liza. "You think so?" Izuku asked while scratching the back of his head, clearly blushing at the praise. Then he felt the penetrating stares, and none were from the petite arch-wizard. "Why is everyone looking at us like that? You got a pair of slaves in effective armor." Megumin replied with a grin, obviously taking a little bit of pleasure at seeing how worried Izuku looked. "What else did you expect?" Megumin had decided to not stop Izuku on his quest to see the demi-human safe and happy. She knew he would either succeed or fail, and would have to rely on her afterwards. Demi-humans were slaves for a reason, and as much as it pained the young druid, he wouldn't be able to change the minds of the people after so many centuries of ingrained culture. Izuku, for his part, wouldn't give up. Demi-humans were still people, and they could learn to be their own people without being at odds with humanity, or the other favored races. And if that didn't happen naturally, he guessed that after defeating the Devil King, he could ask for his own country, or a small island where he could have a strong population of demi-humans. Whatever. Izuku finally stated with a shrug, "It's time to cash in." Walking to their table, deliberately slow, they could see both the Kwa and the Crusader sitting there. One had eyes full of tears, the other a serene expression, as if she had gotten what she wanted. "Why are you still here?" Megumin asked the blonde Crusader, surprised that such a character was so stubborn. She also didn't fail to notice Chika hiding behind Izuku's back, much less the boy taking a protective stance. "Well," Darkness scratched her chin with a sheepish smile, "no one has kicked me out, so." The Kwa wanted to strangle the Crusader. Not only was this female Crusader from a different religion, she had been tricked by her too. I guess it's not a crime to sit at a table inside the guild, Izuku stated, maintaining his defensive stance in front of Chika, while smiling at Liza, who had taken a ready position to protect the petite arch-wizard. So, as long as you can remain civil toward my dear friends, I won't demand you to leave. The Qua was about to have a mental breakdown. Darkness indeed had suggestions to pay the debt, but her suggestions were all bad. On one hand, she had explained that asking for a private room to perform the restoration spell would save her reputation, while also fulfilling the contract conditions, although that meant paying a fee for the room. Her second suggestion: put a price to her dignity and see if any of the males would pay the price, or a lot of them. So, Izuku's voice washed over the blue-haired arch-priestess, making her skin crawl at how kind and caring he sounded, how sickening it was to feel his misguided sense of justice fill the hall. Did you come up with a decision? The Qua was fully aware that the words were directed at her. She also knew that now she had to decide between betraying her followers or work her ass off. Fine. The Qua finally screamed, making Izuku and Megumin flinch. I only have to restore these two, right? No need for theatrics or public humiliation, right? It can even be a single cast as long as both get restored, right? Yes, Izuku replied after a moment to collect himself. You are making a scene out of this though. Fine. The Qua screamed once more, and then made her staff appear on her hand. Her sacred cloth was now easy to see due to her beautiful glow, and then she pointed the staff toward the slave girls. Sacred full restoration. The spell was thrown without fanfare or any special speech. The Qua just wanted to be done with it, and move on to finally get money for her needs. While Izuku could tell that the ex-goddess didn't want to comply, the effects of the spell were clear and quite fast to take effect. Chika and Liza were surrounded by light, and rather soon, their bodies were restored. Yuo? Chika was utterly confused at seeing little thumb claws growing where her wings bent, as if meant to be used like human thumbs against the wing, to be able to grip things. Then she felt something growing out of her lower back. Yep. A new extra mound of flesh grew from the lower back of the black harpy, and was quickly covered in new feathers. Then, a group of longer and stronger feathers grew, forming a beautiful jet black tail. Chika began to spin in place to try to catch a better look of her new appendage, letting out adorable sounds that reflected her wonder and curiosity, especially when the tail twitched and moved. Liza was less obvious. She only stuck out her newly formed tongue, and used it to taste clean her teeth. Speak. Liza tried to use her voice, with obvious effort, due to the long amount of time spent without it. Again. Izuku wisely decided not to mention how primitive her speech was, instead nodding her way with an encouraging smile. Well, you did it. Izuku said to the blue-haired girl, showing both his cute smile and the magic parchment. The contract is fulfilled. There is no more debt for you. As Izuku finished his words, the magical contract caught fire in blue flames, quickly turning to ashes, while not burning anything else. The Qua was now free, but she felt somewhat dirty. This isn't fair, the Qua whispered, just loud enough for those closest to her to listen. I shouldn't have gone through with this. As she finished, a bottle was placed right before her face. The Qua blinked a couple of times, unable to believe her eyes at the sight gracing her. It was a fancy wine she had spent all that money on. Here, a little offering of gratitude. Izuku said, smiling like the good-natured idiot he was, with a pouting Megumin standing by his side, and two demi-humans looking at their master, as if he were the true god in the room. A benevolent goddess should always use her powers to make life better, to heal the wounded and the sick, and to stop injustice whenever it happens. If you remember this, I will make sure to remember to give proper offerings in return. The Qua was quick to hug the bottle, tears flowing from her eyes, denoted how much she loved this gift, as well as the fear of it being taken away on a whim. You better take your time drinking it. Megumin was quick to say, caressing her necklace to remind herself that she had a much better gift. It was quite expensive. The Qua knew very well how expensive it was. Undine's blood, as the wine was called, was not only exquisite, but hard to get, and costly. I know, right? Izuku said with a laugh, still finding it worth the price if it got the goddess in the right mindset. I mean, 2,000 heirs for a wine made of aqua berries. The Qua was struck dumb by those words. The Qua's voice failed to carry over the sound of her head forming a headache. That price couldn't be right. 2,000. As I said, expensive. Megumin replied, failing to notice the distraught face on the arch-priestess. Your good berries are much better than aqua berries. You should try to make wine with them. As Megumin directed her words to a now pondering druid, the Qua began to wonder why she had believed the merchant when he said that the proper price for each bottle was 200,000 heirs. Then she finally understood that her entire tribulation was caused by 5 overpriced bottles of wine. Excuse me. Lina's voice made the conversation stop, making everyone look at the busty counterwoman. I couldn't help but notice that your party used a really high-level holy spell. For the first time since they met, Izuku and Aqua shared the same fear. For a moment, both believed that they would be called forward by some sort of inquisitorial committee to answer for using holy magic to restore demi-humans. Of course, Izuku was more than ready to make a quick escape with Megumin and his girls. Wait, his girls. There's a recently posted quest that's urgent, but no one seems to want to take it. Luna began to explain, failing to notice how the group seemed to relax at her wording. There have been reports of strange lights being seen at the graveyard. Nothing bad has happened, and there is no evidence of necromancy being performed to be found during day hours. Still, the lesser nobles and merchants are feeling nervous, and have demanded that an investigation team be formed and dispatched to the site. Confused stares were directed at the counter lady, who could easily guess that no one in the party could tell why she was talking to them in the first place. Honestly, she was expecting them to take the bait and be the first to check the site. If there was nothing bad, then that was it, but if they ended up missing in action, that would be useful enough to ask for the royal guards to step in. The current reward is of 1 million Eris just for checking the site and reporting back the reason for this phenomenon. Luna half explained, but quickly changed gears upon noticing the druid giving her an inquisitive stare. Also, the guild is ready to pay extra, accordingly to any danger faced during the expedition. Later that night, at the graveyard, it didn't come as a surprise that Aqua would accept the request so easily once the reward was made known, much less that she wanted to keep most of the reward to herself. Izuku had to admit that at least she had an explanation for her demand, a weak one, but an explanation nonetheless. This doesn't make sense, Izuku finally voiced, taking a glance back in the direction of the blue-haired archpriestess. It does. Aqua huffed, fully recovered from her previous humiliation. If this is the result of necromancy or some undead strolling around, I'll do all the work. Aqua was trying to stay strong, but the deadpan look on the faces of her companions was rather unsettling. Of course I'm giving you a portion of the reward just by escorting me. Aqua began to falter under the heavy stares, and, if by chance is something else, well, we'll evenly distribute the reward as usual. Aqua was quite close to crying as the stares continued. What our leader meant, Megumin started, earning a startled reaction from the blue-haired girl. Since when he is the leader? Aqua's shout was completely ignored as Megumin continued. Is what are you doing here? Megumin finished as she pointed her tiny finger toward a certain blonde crusader. As a crusader of Eris, I cannot ignore such claims over hallowed ground. Darkness answered like a duty-bound knight, just to instantly break under the stares of the party members. Also, Aqua registered me as an official party member. It is a pleasure to be in your party. I don't think Master approves, Chika softly said, eyeing the crusader with caution. Blue hair, dummy, Liza threw in, obviously not afraid to voice her opinion. Nobody asked you. Aqua shouted as she kicked the leg of the gator girl, just to find that said leg was harder than the tombstones around them. Oh we. Fine, you can stay, Izuku said with a tired sigh, understanding that it would be detrimental to start an argument in the middle of a quest. However, he moved to be between Darkness and the trio of Megumin, Chika and Liza, as long as you don't try to harm those important to me. Megumin couldn't help but blush at the inclusion of her person among those important to Izuku. She decided that she could live with the demi-humans included. It was common for nobles and heroes to have multiple partners after all. Don't worry, as my party members, it is my duty to protect all of you from harm. No matter how shameful it is for me to actually protect the enemy of my goddess, or a heathen who doesn't even speak her name with respect. Darkness's speech was quickly deteriorating, and soon she was shivering in expectation of perverted things to come. Of course, you are free to remind me of my place with those sexy thorny whips of yours. As Darkness continued to babble about perverted things, and Aqua wailed about a possible broken toe and barbarians made of steel, Izuku made vines appear, and quite quickly, some of these covered the mouths of both rambling girls. They were instantly frozen by the rather serious look on his eyes. Quiet you two. Izuku chastised them with a low voice. Something is happening. Just as Izuku finished, the rest of the party began to notice a change in the atmosphere. Then the chanting began. Oh, spirits of those who couldn't pass on to the afterlife. Lost souls of those who died before their time. The voice was powerful, yet gentle. It was definitively female though. There's a lot of mana in the air, Izuku reported as he began to walk toward the voice, taking careful steps to avoid placing his team in unnecessary danger. Megumin, heed my call and listen to my voice. Seek the light and enter the gates of eternity. The voice continued the chanting, and magic circles were visible in the air above an obelisk that seemed to mark the very center of the graveyard. It is a spell no doubt. High level 2, Megumin replied while focusing on the incantation of the voice. It's not an attack spell though. As they got closer, the obelisk became perfectly visible, just like the woman that was finishing her spell. Soul release. Vanish. As she finished her incantation, the circle in the air became really bright, and then a magic circle in the ground resonated with it. Dozens of souls became visible to the naked eye thanks to the spell, and all of them darted through the circle, as if ascending to heaven. Izuku finally recognized the spellcaster. Izuku's outburst got the attention of the woman, who instantly looked at the assembled party of adventurers. For a moment, it seemed as if a big confrontation was about to break loose. The spell witness was part of the necromancy school of magic, and it had been cast at a rather high level too, which means that by all rights, the woman before her was a necromancer herself. That alone was enough to warrant, at the very least, a visit to the local inquisitorial committee. Ah. Izuku and Megumin. Wiz greeted back once she recognized two of the adventurers in the group, happily walking toward them with no visible sign of being on guard, or even bothered by their presence. What are you? Oh my. Those feathers look even more beautiful now. And once again, the shop owner was trying to reach for the distressed harpy. Fuey. Chika was terrified, unable to imagine any human, other than her dear master, touching her plumage without malicious intent, so, she backed away. No touching. Liza said as she picked the ditzy shopkeeper by the collar of her clothes yet again, only master touch. But they are so beautiful. So fluffy. Wiz rambled as she flailed her arms hopelessly while trying to reach for the bird girl. So, Megumin was the first to find her voice, calling to attention, and failing to hide her smile when Izuku looked solely at her. That's it. Someone making an unrequested exorcism. It seemed so. Izuku seemed just as confused, if also relieved, as he wasn't sure his skulls would be enough to deal with a horde of undead. But if the graveyard needed an exorcism, why not post it in the guild hall as a quest? Izuku's question was valid, although the answer came from an unlikely source. Actually, Darkness's voice earned attention, a lot of it. These kinds of rituals are meant to be performed by the clerics of the Eris Church on a regular basis, but, come to think of it, we hadn't had a proper exorcist in almost a year. The shame in Darkness's voice wasn't mired with pleasure for once, as it seemed that she was genuinely sorry for having to report such a lack of proper staff from her religion. Well, we got an explanation and a reason. Izuku happily said, content with the knowledge that the quest was completed, nothing bad had happened, and people could breathe easily at night now. We can go home now and report early in the morning. Izuku's declaration was met with nodding from everyone, well, almost everyone. No, not yet. Aqua's voice sounded rather ominous, and full of anger. There is still an exorcism to be performed. What? Why? Megumin asked as she looked around, not noticing any shift in the ambient mana that could indicate restless souls. Where is the undead? Aqua's fist was immediately charged with her divine fury. Her blazing eyes were solely focused on the still immobilized shopkeeper. Right among us. Aqua shouted as she leaped at Wiz, just to be enveloped in vines, cancelling her attack, and leaving her unable to even struggle. Izuku. Why? Just shut up and stop being delusional. Izuku replied as he began to walk to the exit of the graveyard, being closely followed by those important to him, and keeping Aqua and Darkness a little bit farther away, to prevent harm to his hearing. Attacking Wiz out of the blue like that. Megumin looked at Izuku with questioning eyes for a moment, but after receiving a mischievous wink, she couldn't help but to wink in return. Both knew very well that the ditzy shopkeeper was undead. Megumin had felt her mana, how unnatural it was, while Izuku had been able to notice the lack of a heartbeat, and the abnormal lack of heat of her body. They didn't know what kind of undead she was, but they were sure of something. She wasn't evil, and her shop had quite the variety of items that piqued their interest. Out of this world. A month had passed since Chika and Liza got their bodies restored, and in that time, Izuku had left an impression on the people he dealt with. Thanks to continuous support and encouragement, Chika had learned how to properly fly. It took her a lot of tries to even learn how to steer, leading to clumsy landings and painful collisions, but with the directions of the green-haired druid, she managed to do what many assumed impossible. Izuku was still warned by Luna to forbid the black harpy from flying anywhere nearby the Church of Eris. Liza had shown little change though. The Gator Girl had been as stoic as ever, following Izuku like a shadow, offering help whenever brute force was needed, but little else. Her speech pattern had remained largely unchanged, showing trouble in articulating complex ideas, and yet not voicing a single complaint. The only visible show of emotion was the movement of her tail, something that Izuku managed to get a basic understanding of, which led to preventing the death of the adventurer named Dust, who after way too many drinks, tried to hit on her and her large breasts. Honestly, Liza wasn't even paying attention, until the drunken adventurer tried to reach for things that only belonged to her dear master. That's when her tail tensed, and that's when Izuku stepped between the two to prevent the removal of a head. As for his party members, they discovered that the green-haired druid was a very hard worker, of the unappreciated variety. This is not what I expected. Darkness sighed as she came to the realization that now she was trapped, even when it is what I wanted. When the perverted crusader joined the party, she expected to be on the receiving end of all kinds of attacks and mistreatment. She expected Izuku to be like any other young male, and try to seduce her, to make use of his beautiful thorny whips to attack her, until she surrendered her body, to use her as a meat shield on the battlefield. Instead, the boy was kind, caring and considerate. She had revealed to the party her noble-born status, and while she was happy that such information didn't change the dynamics of the group, it irked her that Izuku had made it very clear that her station should never be abused. She couldn't leave the party though. Their dream as a crusader was as generic as it was virtuous. She wanted to serve and protect someone of pure heart and heavenly disposition, to be the shield of someone who embodied the ideals of love, devotion and compassion. A symbol of light. She just never expected her dream to take the shape of a druid. This is so unfair. Darkness muttered as she indulged in her newfound pastime of drinking beer. She wasn't getting hammered, she just needed to numb her mind, so she didn't have to suffer her conflicting emotions. Izuku had called her tank, a role he described as the one who takes all the aggression of their enemies, making them forget that the rest of the party existed, thus ensuring everyone else's survival. She had enjoyed the idea, and loved the theory behind the reasoning, as such strategy was commonplace among adventurers, and would give plenty of opportunity for the two spellcasters of the group to rain death on the monsters, with the chance of some delightful friendly fire. In practice, however, they should allow the enemies to reach me, Darkness muttered before taking another sip. Turns out, Izuku was a master tactician. Dozens of battles had been won by having the enemies target Darkness first, and not a single time had an enemy being able to even try to hit her. Much to her increasing annoyance, Izuku was getting better at dispatching large groups of enemies with spikes that suddenly shot from below the charging hordes, or restraining truly large monsters with dozens of thorny vines, leaving the creatures as perfect targets for their petite crimson demon companion. Darkness had yet to even try to use her sword in combat, not that she was lacking EXP gains, or money, as Izuku insisted on properly dividing the rewards, her noble status notwithstanding. Darkness realized that, at the very least, she was achieving one of her dreams, unlike her current companion. Everything hurts, Aqua complained, in some misguided hope of getting heard and consoled. Stupid Izuku. Why does he insist on working me to the bone 5 days a week? Aqua had found Izuku's hardworking habits to be inhumane. For 5 days he would take fetch quests in the mornings, and then extermination quests in the afternoon. Both types were of course local requests, always aimed to be completed within reasonable distance of the town, and within reasonable difficulty levels. Wyverns, griffins and manticores were avoided, but packs of derules, bands of goblins, and even vermin hunting in the sewers was taken, much to the horror of the blue-haired archpriestess. Well, it's not like he is forcing you to go on every quest. Darkness's words made the ex-goddess flinch. He told you long ago that if it was too much work for you, you could simply not go, or find an easier job on your own. Aqua grimaced at her current options. She hated being dragged into caves, through thick forests, walking through endless plains, and worst of all, having to walk inside the foul sewer system. Her problem was that she needed the money to sustain her vices and lifestyle. She had been able to afford a room at the inn, and couldn't face the idea of returning to the stables. This was only possible thanks to the money she earned at a regular pace. The downside was that Izuku divided the monetary rewards based on usefulness, meaning that she was getting the least amount of it from the entire party. Finding a job would mean that she would have to work from early in the morning until very late, making barely any money, but staying away from walking so much and being exposed to danger, or worse still, lengthy lectures about being a more active party member. All because she was stingy with her spells. I'm not going to start working like a lowly commoner. Aqua retorted, although she didn't raise her voice, and I'm not wasting my sacred magic by blessing his slaves. Neither did you heal the wounded villagers we aided on our way back in the last quest. Darkness added, trying to pick a small fight with Aqua to get an insult or two, a habit picked due to the lack of mistreatment from the green-haired druid, or to bless me, Megumi or Izuku during all these quests. Shut up. You barbaric meat shield. Aqua finally shouted, earning a smile from the masochistic crusader. If that failure of a hero is really that smart, then why isn't he getting more money? He is just a pervert trying to surround himself with pretty girls. Behind her desk, Luna frowned at the loud voice of the archpriestess. Izuku and his party had been completing quests at an astounding rate, getting more work done than several parties of good reputation put together. While it had become a commonly heard gossip that the green-haired leader enjoyed the attentions of young girls, Luna knew it wasn't because he was throwing money at them. Much to her despair, Izuku had commissioned a heavy-duty carriage. Luna knew she was partially to blame. The young druid had asked first for land to own, or a building to purchase and turn it into a base of operations, which the guild attendant assumed would be turned into some sort of druidic groove. Seeing his disappointment when she informed him that purchasing land was impossible without an ability title, and that owning buildings was limited to civilian housing or guild-approved businesses, with a rather high tax attached, was rather heartbreaking for her. The request for the carriage nearly drove her to tears though. Izuku, while earning monikers like Slave Driver and Harem Collector, had become famous for completing quests. This had earned this branch of the guild some handsome bonuses from the crown. This also meant, for those with a minimum of intellect and common sense, that once he was gone, said bonuses would disappear as well. Unfortunately, her only option was to stall for time by having the carriage construction being delayed, a tactic that the dwarves had refused. The fact that one of the generals of the Devil King had moved to a close fortress only made things worse. The only ones posting quests now were either scholars or irresponsible lesser nobles, leading to Izuku being the only reliable source of completed quests. A source about to disappear. Meanwhile, explosion. Boom. As the ruins of the fort were subjected to the magic of the petite arch-wizard, Izuku looked at the damage done while trying to understand Megumin's ambition. It wasn't just a desire to destroy, nor her way to scream I am here. She wasn't like Bakugo. That felt good. Megumin exclaimed while dropping backwards, being immediately caught by her green-haired crush. She had come to terms with the idea of crushing after her first friend and party leader. She had come to terms with the idea that the boy was too much of a good catch to let him go. While not being conventionally handsome or filthy rich, he was cute, caring and very able to provide everything the girl really needed. Her sour and traumatic experiences while traveling from her village to Axel had taught her to appreciate steady supplies of food and water, as well as cherish proper shelter. While she never expected to become rich and be surrounded by luxury, having no immediate needs was a rather big jump from her days at the academy. "Are you alright?" Izuku asked with caring eyes and voice, all while guiding his petite companion to rest her head on his lap. "You really need to upgrade your mana reserves before powering up your favorite spell." Megumin giggled at his words, obviously thinking that this boy adored being there for her. "Why would I?" Megumin threw her smugest grin, an action that Izuku found adorable, doubly so since she had agreed to not use her eye patch anymore. "You are going to always be there for me." In the background, both Chika and Liza seemed to agree. Their benevolent master was going to always be there for them, keeping them safe and happy. "I don't know about that." Izuku's reply caught the three girls by surprise. "I'm going back home once I defeat the Devil King. I'm not sure I can take you with me." Izuku's dream was no secret. Agreeing to Megumin's idea to make wine with his good berries had led to an embarrassing moment where Izuku had spilled how much he had been hurt by his idolized hero, and how he intended to return one day to show everyone that the little useless Izuku was now strong enough to be a hero too. The part of not being able to take anyone with him was new though. "What?" Megumin shrieked, unable to contain her outrage. Chika and Liza were visibly startled, although that was due to the idea of being left behind. "Why?" "Because," Izuku seemed to struggle to find an answer. He certainly looked as if regretting his choice of words already. "My homeland is way too far away from here." Izuku's struggle didn't come from not wanting to say the truth, it came from wanting to explain everything, and have proper friends. Worse still, he was growing fond of the petite arch-wizard, and awfully attached to Chika and Liza. Unlike other people of his age back home, these three were adamant on hearing him, appreciating his intellect, and his drive to keep everyone safe. His strategies during extermination quests had been proof of this. With Chika being a surprisingly stealthy scout, and Liza having the potential to be an extraordinary heavy hitter, they had been able to set ambushes and traps, lure monsters out of their territories, and deal with them with minimal effort or risk. It was becoming hard to not letting all that praise go to his head. "Chika will follow master." Chika barely managed to not raise her voice, finding the idea of being abandoned intolerable. "Anywhere master goes, Chika will be there." Liza furiously nodded, obviously sharing the same mindset. The Black Harpy was smart, smarter than she should be. That's why she knew that being given to another master was a big no. The first thing that would happen to her if she was given to someone else would be a thorough mutilation, and that was the least of the horrors awaiting her. For the Gator Girl, the idea of being dumped yet again into a cold cage with no food was more than enough to cling to her kind master with all her strength, let alone her strong love for him. Izuku had yet to become aware of the feelings that the demi-human girls had for him. "We will follow you to the end of the world." Megumin's words were actually sweet, if a little bit pushy, as she wasn't going to let him escape. "Besides, you can produce food. Will you follow me beyond this world?" Izuku's reply was given with a pained smile, then he signaled for his girls to sit by his side. "Megumin, Chika, Liza." Izuku spoke the names with the conveyed intention of having their full attention. "I come from a different world. One where there are no job classes, and people are born with special powers that are badges of status." The silence that followed his words of truth was short-lived, as Megumin was rather quick to let out a playful chuckle. "Is it your backstory?" Megumin's question wasn't an attack. Her peers back at her village were famous for coming up with wild tales for their origins, and it was common for her people to believe others would do the same. "Is that how you explain your unusual nature magic? You are a druid from another world." Izuku couldn't even begin to be angry at not being believed. Megumin's accepting smile, and obvious delight, was actually infectious. "Chika believes, master." The Black Harpy was quick to show her loyalty, even if her faith was questionable. "Master is too kind for this world." Liza didn't show any signs of belief or disbelief. The Gator Girl considered herself lucky enough to have such a kind master, so his origins were unimportant to her. "Would you believe me if I show you proof?" Izuku's question made the chuckles stop, although Megumin's playful eyes kept their shine. "You have proof?" Megumin's voice denoted that she had done this before. Perhaps she herself had fabricated proof to some of her claims, or had judged fabricated proof by her peers in the past. Izuku nodded, and then reached for the side bag below his robes. He knew that saying things wouldn't be enough. He knew that showing simple trinkets from his world could be chalked up to magic artifacts. There was only one way to convince an educated spellcaster like Megumin: otherworldly knowledge. "Here, I'll show you knowledge from my world," Izuku announced as he repositioned the petite girl, making her lean against his chest, and looking at the objects on his hands. It was a notebook and a pen. Megumin knew the items. She had used items like those, just different. The notebook was made of a material that was obviously paper, but the quality of the paper was impossibly high for something so mundane, and yet it wasn't like the parchment used for spellbooks. The pen, however, was made of a material she had never seen before, plastic, and the point was too tiny to suck in the ink. "This is my notebook on chemistry." Izuku started, throwing in a word that immediately sounded alien to the arch-wizard, which was surprising on its own. Chemistry is the science that studies the composition of all matter, its structure, and reactions in. For the next hour, Izuku began to explain to the Crimson Demon the basics of chemistry, speaking of the blocks of reality, called atoms, and how they linked with each other to compose all matter. Then he spoke of the basic states of all matter, and how the change of phase affects the molecular structure of the materials. Megumin was speechless, taking in words and concepts that went against the magical principles she had committed to heart and memory. Worse still, as Izuku continued his lengthy explanation, she had seen the writing in which these otherworldly teachings were recorded, made of symbols completely alien to her, impossibly so, as she was well versed in all the languages of the continent, but only those in use in dead tongues. The symbols weren't just random scribbles, they were orderly, carefully made, showing repetition and consistency, doubly so as the young druid scribbled translations in common. She was looking at a alleged language she had never seen before, a language that was not recorded in the great library at her village. Knowledge that was not recorded anywhere in this world. Izuku had to stop as he was getting into the basics of thermodynamics when he noticed that the petite girl was looking at his face, so intently that he began to turn red. "Let me see your adventure card," Megumin all but demanded. While the demi-humans had been left out of the conversation due to the ridiculous complexity of whatever their master was saying, Megumin had decided to make a final test. The young druid could have found the notebook in some kind of ruins. It could be ancient knowledge of a lost civilization that had been at the site of an artifact that taught him the language. One thing was to have this knowledge, another is to be able to use said knowledge. Here it is. Izuku had handed over the identification without even a hint of hesitation, as if he already knew this was going to happen. Megumin didn't lose any time and went directly for the skills. Iron whip, bark skin, good berry, dancing lights, plant manipulation, plant growth, spike growth, plant analysis, plant modification, wild shape. Megumin blinked a few times, looked away from the card, and then focused again on it. There was nothing about the thorny whips, the wall of thorns, the plant tentacles, or any of the advanced skills Izuku had shown, only basic skills. The only explanation Megumin could think of was that Izuku was working on a different logic than what druids use. That meant that he was using knowledge that was unavailable for other druids, knowledge of the natural world that had to belong to another world, change into an animal that doesn't exist in this world. Megumin demanded. She really wanted to believe her crush was special, in every sense, but her pride as a skilled spellcaster needed irrefutable proof of this discovery. If Izuku's claim was real, then he should be able to turn into something obviously not from this world, something that no other druid could change into, something outside the bestiary from the guild. Sure. Izuku replied with a smile, and then stood up, leaving the petite arch-wizard in the care of the steadfast gator girl. Izuku had prepared for this. He knew that the skull wild shape would be necessary to prove his claim. He also knew that most animals he knew from back home had equivalents in this world. Most could be considered subspecies of existing monsters that he could have seen in secluded areas. But there was a small group of creatures that had no equivalent in the bestiary he had studied. Extinct creatures in his world that looked nothing like the monsters of this world. Well, some of them. Izuku visualized the creature he needed, recalled all the knowledge he had of it, and then channeled the mystical energies into his body. The transformation was relatively fast, and by the end of it, Megumin was looking at a large reptilian creature, standing on its hind legs. Said legs had talons ending in hooked claws, one being much larger than the others. There were feathers growing on its scaly hide, prominently so on his head and arms, and at the end of the long tail. Most of the body, while obviously scaly and reptilian in nature, was covered in feathers that weren't fully feathers, and the head was slightly similar to that of a dragon, but without horns. Izuku had transformed into a Utahraptor. It looked like a chimerical monster. But it wasn't. Because druids couldn't turn into monsters, especially not of the chimerical variety. That meant she was looking at an animal that was not registered in any bestiary. An animal that, by the looks of it, would be a predator so successful that every hunter and ranger would know about it, and every knight would try to turn into a war mount. That meant that Izuku was indeed from another world. Master. Liza suddenly shouted, eyes sparkling with adoration. Beautiful. Megumin only had one thing to say. You have to let me ride you. The next day, Izuku was glad for Megumin's understanding and support. The petite crimson demon had fully believed Izuku's story, his history, how he used to live, how he managed to get into this world, and how he arrived to the city. He still held on to the fact that he had died in the process, not wanting to startle the arch-wizard or his girls, and had asked them to keep the secret about his origins. Megumin and the demi-human girls had agreed, much to his relief. Unfortunately for Izuku, he now had to face a much bigger challenge. Megumin had demanded his knowledge, specifically to make a much more powerful explosion. She had been so adamant on creating either a new spell, or at least create her own flair of the spell, that the green-haired druid had even managed to make a deal. He would integrate his scientific knowledge into her magic, and she would learn enough spells to be useful outside of combat. She had agreed to learn 5 more spells of his choosing. Now they were standing in the same mountainous road, just waiting for Chika to return with her report. Master. Chika called as she landed, making everyone flinch at her screeching voice, before she switched to a more subdued whisper. Just like yesterday, Chika only saw a few skellies and no sign of a controller. Izuku nodded, happy to find that just like the previous day the fort had no humans or creatures that would suffer due to the collateral damage. Are you ready? Izuku asked the arch-wizard, who was nose-deep into a notebook where she and the young druid had worked most of the night and the morning, combining her methodology of spellcrafting with all the scientific formulae that Izuku knew. The end result was a monstrosity of an equation that would result in something similar to an explosion, with a mana requirement of just 1/3 of her normal explosions. I am. Megumin replied, handing back the notebook. I'm just not sure how to name this if it works. It's just an experiment. Izuku kindly reminded to his companion, we are just testing if your magic can be combined with my science. Megumin gave a sigh, knowing that her companion was right, but unable to shake the feeling that if she managed to create something new, she wanted the proper name to be immortalized. I guess you are right. Megumin finally conceded, then smiled as a name formed in her mind. At least is going to cause a bang. That will do. If anything, it's going to be a big bang. Izuku froze at the naming of the spell. He hoped that the final result had nothing to do with the name. Megumin closed her eyes and positioned her free hand forward, firmly pointing her staff towards her open palm. Spellcrafting required visualization along the mathematical structuring of the spell, guiding the mana to fill the given shape. Incantations helped to shape and visualize the effect, as well as keeping focus on the equations required. The first incantation of the spell was immortalized when a new spell was created. That's why she spent a long time thinking of it, going through all the theories that Izuku had explained to her. The first law of creation is destruction, and the end result of destruction is creation. The moment her words left her lips, a healthy amount of mana had gathered at her hand, forming a sphere, a protective bubble. The blocks of reality, atoms, gather before me. Smaller than a droplet in the ocean, yet stronger than the hardest metal, heed my command. A tiny speck of light, almost imperceptible, formed in the center of the translucent sphere. Clash against each other at speeds beyond speed. Shatter and unleash all the energy that created you. The speck of light turned into a miniature sun, and the protective bubble began to ripple. Izuku knew that there had been a miscalculation, either on his part, or Megumin was going overboard with the visualization. Big bang. Megumin shouted as she launched her sphere of energy at the abandoned fortress. She had a quivering smile as she watched the tiny, insignificant thing fly against the cliff housing the ancient structure, expecting to see a mediocre detonation in the distance. By the time the sphere seemed to reach its destination, she found herself being tackled to the ground by Izuku. Then she noticed Chika and Liza throwing themselves over them too. She barely managed to see a bright light coming from the castle by the time a massive quantity of vines formed a dome over all of them. Then a deafening booming roar hit them, along with a rather intimidating tremor. What is happening? Megumin screamed, obviously worried about an enraged dragon that she may have accidentally hit with her spell. The terrible sound of raging winds and heat hitting the protective dome seemed to give credence to her idea. You overdid it. Izuku's answer didn't make sense. She had expected a detonation, so why did it feel like the mobile fortress destroyer was rampaging all around them? A few seconds later, half of the dome receded, leaving only a shield in the direction of the detonation. Izuku had made the vines take the strength of the fabled iron bark, and they still ended up carbonized by the mere friction caused by the expanded air. What happened? Megumin asked, fully expecting to see an angry dragon, or the destroyer. Then she noticed it. There was no more fortress, nor was any sign of the cliff it used to stand upon, only a smoking crater. You overdid it. Izuku replied while slapping her head. Control. First you control what you are doing. Then you can slowly add more power. As Izuku continued to loudly lecture now startled Megumin, Chika and Liza watched the ridiculous level of destruction. Liza only knew that Megumin was not someone to anger, but Chika could see something more. Her master, her hero, was going to bring a lot of changes to this world. Spellcraft successful. Detonation branch of magic updated. Spell registration. Megumin's Big Bang. Back at the guild hall, while everyone was talking about the mysterious flash of light coming from the mountains, and a tremor that scared more than a few children, Aqua was looking at a certain request on the quest board. Oh no. My poor cute worshippers. Aqua exclaimed as she read the request. The local chapel to her divinity was at risk of being closed due to a lack of tax payments. Thanks to the Church of Eris being the main religion of the town, her followers needed to pay taxes like any other business. It wasn't a heavy tax though, meaning that to have missed payments, hard times had to have struck the local priest. There has to be a way to help them. Aqua said to herself as she read the required money to help her small congregation. There has to be a way to get 50 millionaires. The deadline made things difficult, but then she remembered that her green-haired companion most likely could provide such money. But how to convince him? At that time she didn't know it, but she would be the reason for a massive blow against her own faith. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination. Goodbye, everyone.